And then you just
I'm thinking of setting something like that. You need more of a
May I have one second? Is it fine until Sorry, that's my point.
Yeah. Well, you go and see what it goes.
Well, I mean, there's no point going.
Yeah.
Actually answer.
It's a walk.
Coronial, now stand resumed. Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honour, Officer Mitchell Hanson is in the witness box, and I call Officer Hanson. Thank you. Officer, before you give your evidence, do you promise to tell the truth to the court?
I promise.
Thank you. So could you please tell the court your full name and your rank?
Sure. My full name is Mitchell Brian Hanson. My rank is Constable First Class.
And where are you currently based?
I'm currently based at the Peter McCauley Centre, working with the Territory Response Group.
How long have you been with the Territory Response Group?
I've been working with the Territory Response Group since the 13th of August 2020.
Constable, you provided a number of documents that are of assistance to Her Honour. The first is you participated in an interview on the 17th of January 2020. In fact, 2 interviews on that same day. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
The first started at 9:52 and went till 10:34, and the next one at 11:52 and went to 12:09 p.m. The Her Honour has the transcript of those interviews, and they're in front of you as well, 7-54 and 7-55, Your Honour. And then you also gave evidence at the trial of Constable Zachary Rolfe, is that right?
That's correct.
And that transcript is at 7:55a, Your Honour. Constable, can I start off with your background? You joined the Northern Territory Police Force on the 30th of May 2016, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I just want to ask you about how you came to be a police officer, but before that, you grew up in the Northern Territory, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
I've been pretty lucky to grow up all over the Territory. I was born in Victoria. I moved to the Territory when I was, before I could remember. Lived in Darwin, I lived in Alice Springs. And then I spent a good portion of my sort of early teens and grew into a man on Groote Island.
Your dad was working on Groote Island, is that right?
Correct. My dad was a bush cop. Yep.
And so how old were you when you first went to Groote Island?
I can't remember exactly how old I was. I think I would have been around 13 years old. It was quite a while ago.
And you were there through into adulthood, obviously?
Yes, that's right.
You went to school on Groote Island?
Yep, I went to school. I did year 7 to 10 on Groote Island, and then I completed an apprenticeship as a welder in the mines out there.
When you were going to school, was there bilingual education?
There was, for a period of time, where we learned the bits and pieces of the Anandili language. Yeah.
And did you, as a result of going to school on Groote Island and growing up there for so long, have friendships with Aboriginal people from Groote?
Yeah, I did. My dad went out there as the school-based constable, so fortunately, I did get to spend a lot of time with the Indigenous schools. I remember once there was a time when Dad, I don't know if he let me have the day off school. It was a weekday, so it was a bit. May have happened. And then I went out to Umbercumber and we made fishing spears with the local Indigenous guys that were around, probably a little bit older than me, but around my age. And then we went to a place called, I think it was 13 Mile Beach or something, somewhere you're not locally allowed to go without the Indigenous community members, where we went fishing and collected turtle eggs and did those sorts of things.
Do you still have those friendships?
I haven't been to Groote Island for quite some time, but I do hear the names of the people from there come up over the radio. I have run into a couple of the guys from the Dorilla family. It's a particular family that I was quite close to. I did a music program with a lot of Indigenous guys as well. And yeah, I just know how they are. If I was to go back there, I would fall straight back into those relationships immediately.
And what about your time in the rest of the territory? As a result of that, do you have friends who are Aboriginal people?
Yeah, I do. A couple of the guys off my squad were Indigenous. One was from the Barunga area, who I was fortunate enough to serve with in Port Keats when I lived and worked out there. I haven't had the opportunity to go and meet his family, but he says that he's got, they've got a skin name for me and some of the other guys from my squad. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to develop awesome relationships with people from all over the territory.
What was it like growing up on Groote Island?
It was a very interesting place. It was probably a lot more diverse than you would think, being, such a remote community. Obviously, you can only get there by plane or by boat. You can't, you don't have, you can't just freely leave and come back. But there was families from all kinds of different walks of life. There was a lot of people that were employed in the mines were from South Africa. So we had lots of friends from South Africa. We had friends that had grown up, in a similar circumstance to myself. The police family was really good, and obviously the police force is quite diverse now. I had Indigenous kids in the school that I went with, and I, hung out with. I did my music program after school. So, and that was basically me, myself, and my brother. And then it was 13 other Indigenous kids from the other community. So it wasn't like, we were the minority there, which was really cool. It was very eye-opening. Yeah, it's a good experience.
You said that you left school I think year 10 and you became a Boilermaker, or you did a Boilermaker's apprenticeship, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then you worked as a Boilermaker for a while, is that right?
Yeah, so I finished school, I completed year 10, and I had a decision to make whether I would stay in school and go down that road, or I'm more of a creative individual. I like to work with my hands. I grew up working with Dad, so for me the choice was pretty easy to fall into the workplace and do that. So I became a Boilermaker. I completed my apprenticeship out there. I worked within the mines there for 2 years, and then I began doing fly in, fly out. I did that for a further 2 years, living in Darwin and working out on Groote. And
then what made you join the police force in 2016?
Well, Dad was a cop, and I guess that was probably a big part of the influence. But the cops that were out on Groote, they were all there. That was like our family out there. All of those other guys, and my dad's pretty good relationally. Like he gets to know people quite well, and so it was easy to feel like the police was really comfortable, I guess, that police family. And so I guess that sowed the seeds of what I wanted to do for a living there. So it was a bit of a sort of career aspiration, I guess.
So you grew up, am I right, with a respect and an admiration for the police officers?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Including your dad?
Of course, yeah.
But other officers as well?
Yeah, 100%.
What was it that you admired about them as a young person?
I guess I like, I like to have good, strong relationships with my friends. And I could see that, if you were in trouble, like I remember Dad getting a call out in the middle of the night. I don't even know if he was on call. There might have been a riot. I don't know what the job was, but I remember Dad running to the bedroom, throwing his overalls on, chucking his boots on, and running out the door. And just that sense of mateship that was there, I guess that really spoke to me, and I really appreciate having those relationships. And so that was a big thing for me.
Did you get an opportunity as a kid to observe how the local police, you described your dad as a bush cop, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah.
How he, for example, interacted with people in the community?
Yes, I did. My dad's a really good communicator. I probably was too young, and I didn't have the knowledge of policing, so I couldn't probably relate that to bush policing in and of its own, versus the difference of policing in town. But I definitely got to see Dad's relationships and how, using your mouth is a much better weapon than other things. And I remember, you're sort of never off duty in a small town. So when we were down the street or whatever, and there was something going on, Dad would just start yarning away to these people, and they would very quickly, he could just de-escalate stuff just by talking, and it was really something to see. Yeah, it was really cool.
And he worked hard, your dad?
Yeah, he did. He worked. He worked a bit too hard sometimes. He was always chipping away as a police officer, but then he used to love fixing boats, and so I think that's where I sort of got my my passion for working with my hands, because I would work with Dad fixing up his boats or just on his projects and stuff.
I might come back to some of your reflections on policing out bush.
Sure.
After you'd had an opportunity to do some policing, and you told us about your time in Waday or Port Keats. So I'll come back to that as we go along chronologically, if you don't mind. You tell us in your interviews that you joined the police force on the 30th of May 2016. Well, that was the first day at police college.
Correct.
And did you have any friends in the job, apart from your dad or your dad's older friends? Did you have any mates around your own age who were joining?
No, I sort of, I knew what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I wasn't doing it for anyone else, I guess. And I didn't join, I didn't have any buddies going through. All the relationships that I have in the police have been fostered since that point.
How old were you, Constable, when you joined?
I think I just turned 22, or I may still have been 21. I haven't done the maths, sorry.
21, 22, pretty young fella, is
Quite
that
young,
fair?
yeah.
When you joined in your group at college, there was Constable Rolf, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
and he was your squad mate, obviously, and you became good, close friends, is how I think you describe him in one of the interviews.
Yes, that's correct.
And you'd still describe him today as a good, close friend.
Yes.
Can you recall back in college doing any training or education about cultural competency?
Yeah, we did. We had it was like a field day with at the Bagot community, where we went out and we had local presenters speaking to us about all kinds of different things. It was quite hard to get a sense of the culture in that place, because it's not necessarily a remote community. And I believe that a lot of the camps around Darwin are made up of people from different cultures. So we did do some, I think they called it cultural sensitivity training, something similar to that. But for me, that was a, I'd grown up immersed in the different cultures and stuff, from Alice Springs to Good Island, and had family that lived in Gove, so I spent quite a bit of time out in Gove as well. And it was just a nice experience for me rather than a big learning curve like it was for some.
Very different to someone who's never met an Aboriginal person ever.
Absolutely.
But do you recall being given any particular instruction as to how you should communicate with Aboriginal people sensitively?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall during that, I just grouped in together Aboriginal people. You know, don't you, that not all Aboriginal people are the same, and that it's offensive to think of all Aboriginal people
Absolutely.
as being the same. Was there anything that you learnt about trying to understand the different cultures from different areas around the territory during that training in the police?
I had a pretty good grasp at the time that something that works for one, like even one family within the same community, isn't going to be what it necessarily is effective for another one.
Sure. But was there any training on that, or just trying to get you to help us to understand what the training was like?
I don't recall that specifically, that training on that topic specifically.
Do you recall, Constable, any education being delivered about the history of relationships between police and Aboriginal people in different parts of our country?
Yeah, during it wasn't during that cultural sensitivity side of things, but during our police training at the college, we did have it was like a group project where we had everyone was sort of assigned a different topic, and then we would present on that. And a lot of that was about the history of Aboriginals in Australia and their relationship with police.
What sort of things did you learn?
We learned about incidents like the Coronial Walker. We learned about incidents similar to the Coniston massacre. Things of that nature.
Do you recall, were you given some curriculum materials?
I think it was, we were given a brief of what our study topic was to be. And then from that point, we sort of developed our, we built what we were going to discuss with the rest of our squad mates. It was really sort of a good way to do it because we had, 5 or 6 different groups, and each one had their own topic. So we got to learn about 5 or 6 topics. We learnt one really well because that's what we presented on, but then we learned about the rest of them from the others, which was really good.
When you appreciate I'm asking you to cast your mind back now,
Sure.
6 years, but when you learnt about something like, or incidents like the Coniston massacre, do you recall learning that there were in Australia state-sanctioned massacres?
Yeah, so the Coniston massacre, I believe I learned about back then, but also was talking with someone in the station yesterday, and they brought it up with me. It jogged my memory on it. So I remember that there was a state-sanctioned massacre, which was where they even fudged the numbers on what occurred. I can't remember what started it, but they said basically that 32 members of the community were killed, but it was more 60 was more accurate.
Okay. So the state minimised the numbers of Aboriginal people who've been killed.
That's what I understand.
Do you remember when you're learning about it in 2016 that you learned anything about the fact that Aboriginal people today may well have fear as a result of the history of relationships between police and Aboriginal people in this country?
I don't remember learning that specifically. I do understand that, having grown up in that world. And
that was my next question, Constable. Is that something that you accept?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely things that linger from that. In my opinion, it's no different to how a Jew might feel after World War II. Like, those things hang around, absolutely. Do you appreciate the value in learning about our history and learning about it from Aboriginal people so they can tell us how they feel? Yeah, I do. I've come to, as I've grown, I've come to learn the importance of having a more holistic view of what is going on around me, not just seeing things from my perspective, but, understanding where other people come from also. Come back to some of those issues as we go on, but your first posting was November 2016 in Alice Springs, is that right? That's correct. Did you receive, when you got down to Alice Springs, any specific training or learning about the Aranda people of Alice Springs? I don't believe so. Okay. And I take it flows from that you didn't receive any specific training or education about different cultural groups who live around Alice Springs, for example, Yuendumu or... I don't believe so. I think we saw a map where the different family groups were located. That's where I learned about the Walker people being from the Yuendumu area and so on. But there was no specific induction or orientation along those lines, is that right? I don't recall. I don't believe so. You stayed in Alice Springs, I think, from November 2016 until the end of 2019, is that right? That's correct. Okay. So during those 3 years, Constable Rolfe was here in Alice Springs as well, is that right? Yes, that's correct. And you were on the same patrol group as Constable Rolfe for part of that time? Yes, I was. How long? How many of those years do you think? I was on the same patrol group 5, for my entire time here, which was really uncommon. So in that time, we had people come and go from the group. I believe that there may be 8 to 12 months where Zach and I were consistently on the same group.
Is that Patrol Group 5?
That's correct.
And Superintendent Proctor, who's prepared a report to assist Her Honour, says that you're the officer who worked the most shifts with Constable Rolfe. There's 42 shifts that you worked with him. I'm sure you weren't counting them at the time.
No, not at all.
Does that surprise you, or does that seem about right?
That sounds about fair. Yeah.
Was that by choice or accident that you two were in the same patrol group?
I've never asked to be placed on a different patrol group. I like to sort of just make the most of what I've got. And so if those shifts where Zach and I were together would have been by chance.
That Patrol Group 5 in 2019, am I right that that included Mark Sykes as well?
I don't recall exactly. I think he was on... I remember when he came down to Alice Springs, I think he was in like a posse cage type set up for a good period of it. There would have been times when I definitely worked with him, because I remember working with Mark Sykes, but I don't remember what periods and for how long he was dedicated to Patrol Group 5.
James Kirstenfeld, was he someone you worked with regularly?
Yes, I worked with James Kirstenfeld quite a bit.
In Patrol Group 5?
That's correct.
And what about Sergeant Kirkby?
Sergeant Kirkby was my shift sergeant for quite a few shifts, I believe. But that the shift sergeant and the watch commander would regularly change. So I'm not 100% sure at what periods throughout that. My 3 years here in Alice Springs were with Paul Kirkby as my shifty.
When you got down to Alice Springs, you joined the IRT, Immediate Response Team, is that right?
That's correct.
When did you do that?
At a guess, I don't know the dates. At a guess, I would say it would be about 6 months before I left.
So sometime in 2019.
Yes, that's correct.
Was Constable Rolfe already a member of that team?
Yes, he was.
And was one of your reasons for joining that your mate Zach was already in there?
My main reason for joining was that I did have desires to go to the Territory Response Group. That's the field that interests me. So I wanted to sort of build up as much experience as I could in that area so that I would be the most capable police officer I could be for the role that I wanted to progress into.
Did Constable Rolfe tell you anything about the role before you started?
I don't recall conversations specifically about it. It wouldn't surprise me if he had.
Did he give you the impression, for example, that it was good fun? Anything of that nature?
I was under the impression that the training was really good because it would further our ability to do general duties a lot of the time. Have a little bit more, help us with like building an appreciation of how to attend jobs in the safest manner possible. You know, a lot of the time we in those high pressure moments we fall back to to our training baseline. And so my intention, and which has always been the case with policing, I believe it's so important, is to, if I can raise my baseline of my training as high as possible, when I am under stress, I can fall and still land on a high standard.
So when you in that year, 2019, when you were a member of the IRT, do you recall how many jobs you would have gone out on?
Jobs that were specifically IRT deployments, I think there would be less than 10, maybe 5.
In your first interview at page 19, you say, generally, most of the times that I've been deployed on IRT jobs was for things like search and rescue. It was for things like large community and civil unrest. We even went out to just relieve members sometimes.
That's correct.
Like we went to Borroloola a couple of times when their members were just flat out and they needed someone to go and help us. So we went out a couple of times.
That's correct.
You also explain at page 21 for my friends, normally when we get called out, we get a phone call from Sergeant Bowens. He'll make us aware of whatever job it is, and then we go. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So about in relation to the jobs that you went, putting aside search and rescue for a moment,
Sure.
the jobs like large community and civil unrest or relieving local members, did you have any formal briefing before you went out for those jobs?
No, we didn't have formal briefings every time where we would come together in a room and have a conversation. Quite often it would be quite a few of those jobs I had attended with Lee Bowens, Sergeant Bowens. So I would have time, for example, there was civil unrest in Hermannsburg, and we attended after the fact to have a positive presence in the community. I sat in the car with, I think it was Brendan Donathorne and Lee Bowens, and we, talked about what was going on. I guess you could call that a formal briefing, where we learned about the job.
Is it an informal briefing a better way to describe it?
Informal briefing is definitely, I would agree that is a better way to describe it. Since joining the Territory Response Group, I've seen a much, the planned responses from the Territory Response Group are totally different. Where we all, someone yells out briefing, everyone yells it out, and then we charge to the briefing room and we sit down for those formal briefings. It definitely wasn't set up that way.
Do you know what I mean by SMEAC briefing?
Yeah, the situation, mission, execution, action, and coordination.
Is there something like that sort of briefing in the TRG whenever there's a job?
Yeah, that's essentially, I think, the framework in which the briefings run off. It's a little bit different, I think, once it gets to the the national guidelines for the way that these jobs run. Especially when it's back then, I didn't understand the difference between general support, high risk, and I would just use the term high risk willy-nilly. Whereas now, I've come to learn the difference, and there's a certain requirement for how we commit to those tactical operations.
And in the TRG there is what you're telling Your Honour.
Yes, that's correct.
And do I understand your evidence that in the TRG, before you go out to a mission, there's a calling briefing, everybody gets it?
You're saying TRG?
Yeah, no, I'm meaning TRG. So in the TRG where you are now, someone calls out briefing and you all huddle together and it's very clear to everybody who's standing there that this is a formal briefing, correct?
Yes, that's correct. There's no ambiguity of what's going on whatsoever.
And we've heard evidence that in the IRT, when you were there in 2019, there was no process for formally allocating a team leader to the job, at least not from we haven't heard about that from the witnesses so far. Is that your experience?
My experience now, looking back, I'm sort of fortunate. I get to see both worlds, the tactical policing world and then the general duty side of things. My experience would suggest that we didn't understand those roles within these deployments, and because a lot of the time, probably 99% of the deployments we went on were general support, so it wasn't necessarily from my understanding, it wasn't necessarily a IRT deployment. It was a general duties deployment with IRT members, because they would often be the only ones that were proactive enough that wanted to go out and make a difference, I guess.
And is it your experience that the members of the IRT in 2019 were not just proactive, but a number of them, including yourself, were ambitious to do other things in the police force, correct?
Yes, that's correct. A lot of us were, we were aware of why we joined the police. We want to make a difference in the community, and that was a big part of. That's a big part of why I joined TRG. The majority of jobs I go to have an impact, and that for me is totally satisfying.
And in terms of your work in the IRT, please understand this is not a criticism, but the IRT, do I take it, was seen by yourself, for example, as a gateway to the TRG because it was an opportunity to prove yourself on some of those risky jobs?
I can understand why you would think that. I definitely didn't see it as a gateway because the people that were... I wasn't proving myself to anyone from TRG. and it wasn't so much about proving myself to others. It was more about trying to develop myself because I knew the pathway I wanted to go down. I'd already completed selection for the territory response group, and I failed the firearms assessment. I got through the 2-day barrier, and then I'd been unsuccessful. So I knew, I evaluated that. I knew I had things that I needed to work on, and I wanted to take every opportunity I could to improve my skills, my knowledge, so that I could achieve the desired outcome at the end of the day.
And when you applied again for the TRG, is the fact that you're in the IRT something that you put on your application?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it held any weight in that space.
Do you remember when you're doing your training with Sergeant Bowens, and do you remember learning about the green operations roles and black operations roles?
Yeah, we did a 2-week course. Excuse me. Did a 2-week course, and in that 2-week course we had the first week was dedicated to what's called black role, where it's like working in and out and around a stronghold where you may have a offender inside, like in a cordon situation that basically where a immediate emergency action has been committed to, and you may need to make entry under rare and urgent circumstances. And then the other week was green roll, where we would learn about inserting in a way that gives us good, we have eyes on a place, we can get really good intel and conduct reconnaissance essentially, and a cordon roll.
And so the green rolls would be covert leading up to a job, for example?
Not necessarily, but if there was a job that required it, then absolutely.
So I take it though from what you've told us that those training in black operations roles and green operations roles were of assistance in terms of the TRG. Is that right? Those skills.
Yeah, I had more of an understanding about what the difference was between the two. That's definitely true.
But your cordon and I would draw that your skills in terms of clearing a room, for example, they were all skills that were going to be of assistance to you in the TRG. Is that right?
Understanding the way a team works in those situations is really important, and the tactics we used in IRT were different to the tactics I've learned doing black roll with the territory response group. Also, the amount of times that we got to train, like that is such a niche, that's such a difficult skill to master, that black roll. To do that well and to do it safely. Like in the TRG, we train that 2 to 3 times a week. And we're always learning and improving.
So one of the things that Herona already has heard evidence about is that the IRT was part-time.
That's
TRG
correct.
is full-time.
Yes, that's correct.
So you can develop a different skill level in those areas
Absolutely.
when you're dedicated to it full-time.
Yep, 100%.
You started to give some evidence earlier about the briefings and the differences between the IRT and the TRG. I take it that when you were in the IRT in 2019, you didn't see the standard operations order, the SOPs?
I think I would have. I definitely had access to it. I think I didn't understand how important it was back then.
Do you remember being trained on it? Being trained about the significance of it?
Yep. When we began that 2-week course, we started with all of that sort of learning. That basically the course started with almost like an induction. We start with all those PowerPoints and whatnot, and then we progress through to the hands-on training.
You've drawn a distinction today between general duties jobs and high-risk jobs. And you've said that when you were a member of the IRT, you didn't sometimes really know whether you were going out on general duties, but just happened to be members of the IRT, or whether it was a specific IRT job. Is that right?
I was never confused about whether it was an IRT deployment or if it was a deployment just with IRT members. Does that make sense?
How did you learn the difference in each case?
Because Sergeant Bowens would say in a text message something along the lines of, we just need a couple of members to go out and provide respite for members at XYZ, like Hermansburg, Borroloola, wherever it was.
If the words in the text, if it was an IRT deployment, you would expect the words IRT in the text message. Is that right?
That's correct.
But did that make any difference to the sort of, or to whether a team leader was appointed?
I don't recall, because we because we didn't have those formal briefings like we do in TRG. We didn't have. I wasn't always aware. On IRT deployments, I was always comfortable with who was the team leader. For example, we would go out and there would be members like Luke Bevan or Brendan Donathorne, Tony Hawkins. We'd have those senior members. And
What do
we
you
would
mean
often.
but do you mean you were always comfortable because you would make an assumption that the most senior member was the team leader?
Part of our police training, just that everyone gets, is that the most competent person would be the team leader of a job. It might not necessarily have come across as using the words team leader. That's only something I've really come to understand in TRG. Excuse me.
In the TRG, is a team leader appointed for every job?
Each team gets a team leader, and there's usually between three and four teams, depending on the numbers that we have for each specific job.
In relation to the most competent person, is it the case, this is when you're in general duties, for example, is it the case that the level of competence might be different depending on what skill is required for a job?
Yes, that is the case.
So some people might have a different view as to who is the most competent in that team to lead the job.
When I say most competent, I mean the person of the highest rank.
When you're in a job, though, looking back on it, it's a good idea, isn't it, to make sure that everybody understands who is a team leader for a particular job?
Yeah, it definitely makes command and control over that team way more effective.
Did you ever see any sort of written operations order or arrest plan or anything of that nature when you went to do a job for IRT in 2019?
No, I don't recall.
What about in TRG?
We use a program called iServe, and on that program, it's really awesome. We all have access to the different, I don't know what it's called, the different folders on that program, you would say, on that application, and generally the orders get written up in that program. So we've got the means. Yeah, we've got the means to be able to just click on it and open it and see it if we want to.
And Her Honour has heard, and tell us if you need a break. I'm sorry.
I just got a bit of a chest thing going on.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you need a break at all?
No, I'm feeling good.
Constable, Her Honour has heard that, of course, some jobs need more planning require more planning than others, or you've got the luxury of planning in some occasions and
Yes.
not others. Where you have the luxury of planning, so something that is not super urgent, you would always expect that there will be a written operations order that you can access on iServe.
As part of the TRG,
As part
that's
of
the
TRG.
case.
But that was not a thing for the IRT, was it?
No, I don't think it was quite. I don't think it was given quite the. Like other jurisdictions have what they call a tier 1 tactical group, and then they have a tier 2, and that second tier is generally a really formal. It's just like the territory response group in a sense. It's a formal. This is what it is. Certain amount of funding just gets dumped into that, and so on. I don't think we quite had that set up. We were just sort of making the best of what we could with what we had, essentially, with IRT.
One of the things Her Honour has heard about is the vest that you might wear, like armour or...
Sure, body armour.
Go into it. I'm sorry.
Body armour.
Body armour.
Yep.
And is that something that you would wear on TRG jobs? Or does it depend?
Depending on the role at the time, and I can't. There's some things I can't comment on.
Sure.
But there is occasions where we won't wear body armour, even though it is technically a more high risk job.
So I won't ask you about
Sure,
when you
thank you.
choose which
I
jobs
appreciate
you
that.
choose to wear body armour on, but when you're wearing body armour in TRG, you understand, I take it, that that's body armour that is within date. And
Yes, that's correct. We audit our armour to make sure that we are not going to, take around and not have it within date, essentially.
So when you were at IRT, do you remember that any body armour that you had might have been out of date or not?
I don't recall auditing the body armour. I think because I was only in there for 6 months or so before I left.
Okay. Did you ever wear body armour on any of the jobs that you went to?
Don't recall. I used to wear a plate carrier when I did general duties, just for my own safety.
Is that something that's optional, the plate carrier?
Well, we get given the ELBV, which is that's the name of the blue vest that we have. But it used to make my back really sore, and so but I still wanted some level of protection, and so. Yeah, I would wear my own. I just bought a plate carrier and I took the plate from that ELBV that I was issued, which was in date, and I would wear that.
Something that you organised for yourself, is that right?
That's correct.
Just want to ask you about a couple of the jobs you did with the IRT. There's one job we've got a record of from Proctor, which involves you and Constable Rolfe, Officer Bevan and Officer Hawkins out at Borroloola from the 27th to the 28th of December, and you recall some jobs out at Borroloola.
Yes.
Do you recall why you were sent out at that time?
For that deployment that you're referring to with Bevan and Hawkins?
Yes.
Yeah, there was an arrest target within the community, and that was one of those deployments where we knew that it was an IRT deployment, and Luke Bevan was the team leader.
And you assumed he was the team leader because he was the one who was the most senior of that group, is that right?
I believe he was the most senior.
What rank was he?
That's testing my memory. I think it was a senior connie first class.
Officer Hawkins was also senior constable though, wasn't he?
I believe so.
Why did you make the assumption that Luke Bevan was the team leader for that one?
He's of a higher rank, and he had taken charge at the location.
Well, Her Honour's already heard about this particular job, I think, because it involved a gentleman with the surname Noble who had thrown a hot drink on a police officer. Is that
yes, right? That's right, yep.
So do you recall the arrest of that person?
Yeah, I do. I do remember.
Were you there for the arrest?
Yes, I was.
Did Constable Rolfe effect the arrest for...
Yes.
And you witnessed it, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you recall hearing any members of the community complaining about the use of force?
No, I don't remember anyone complaining about the use of force. I remember we'd basically been liaising with the community that entire day, and they were saying things like, if you don't find him, we're going to bash him, things like that.
What time of the day was he located?
He was located at some point during the night.
Or the early hours of the morning, is that fair? Or do you think it's the night?
It may well have been the early hours of the morning. I remember it was dark. I don't recall the exact times. There was a lot of... We worked... I'd love to see the promise log on it. I think we worked for like nearly 20-something hours on that one.
And what did you do in an effort to locate him?
We basically just went to his last known residence. We knew he wasn't there because of intel that we'd received from the local members that he had alighted from the community. So we basically we went to his house to make inquiries about his potential location.
And then did you go to other houses around the community to try and locate him?
Yeah, we did. We did foot patrols of the community. We spoke with pretty much every single member we saw in that town. We told them what we were there for, what we were trying to achieve. And the town was very much on board because they were pretty upset about the initial offending that he had been involved in. I can't remember what it was at the time.
Well, we've got the fact sheet that suggests that the police officer handed him a hot cup of tea and he threw it on...
Sure, but the incident that he was arrested for prior to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you recall whether or not you went into a number of houses, as in forced entry into houses?
I don't think we forced entry into any house.
Did you knock and go straight in?
No, I don't believe so. I try and be pretty polite. I always ask permission to enter.
Do you recall how many houses you would have entered over that job?
Not sure, sorry.
Was it less than 10 or more than 10?
I would have been less than 10, I believe.
Do you recall during that job anything else that you did in terms of looking for him in the community? Anything else?
Yeah, we essentially, going back to that green roll training, we sort of we snuck into the bushland behind the house to try and just get some intel on whether he was coming and going from the house, because by that time I think it was quite late. And we figured if he hasn't been at, like, Borroloola is a fairly isolated place. The outstations are quite some way away, and we didn't believe that he was walking to those outstations. So we were under the impression that he was coming and going from the Borroloola community itself. So we waited outside. I think it might have been his girlfriend's place potentially. I think we sat in the bush and we kept eyes on that location for a few hours.
And then eventually he came, is that right?
I don't recall. He did come back, and I think one of the community members called up and said he's at house such and such, and we went there to try and arrest him at that point.
Do you remember between December and March, so December of 2018 and March 2019, whether you went back to Borroloola again?
Yeah, I did do a few deployments out in
Did you
Borroloola.
go back to Borroloola with Constable Rolfe?
I don't think so.
A document that we know as MFIC, which is another list of text messages. Constable Rolfe writes to somebody on the 10th of March, "I'm out at Borroloola, a random community on the coast," because they're rioting. "But we came up last time they did this and smashed the whole community. So this time, as soon as we arrived, they started behaving."
Sure.
Do you know what he means? Can you help us to understand what he might have meant?
Yeah, so it was a common terminology. When
Smash the whole community.
not necessarily the community, but just that word smashed. Oftentimes we would come in and start working, just like doing normal general duties type work, and the shifty would say, "Okay, guys, I need you to go out and smash the jobs tonight," because there was obviously a lot of jobs backed up on the screen.
But listen, just if you will, to what I'm reading again. "We came up last time they did this and smashed the whole community."
I can definitely understand how that sounds. I don't know. I don't think he meant.
Have you?
It's hard to know what he meant.
Yeah, sure. And
I don't know if that text message was sent to me.
no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't, Constable. In relation to the time that you were in Borroloola in December, did you carry a long arm?
I carried a less lethal shotgun. For
Meaning a beanbag shotgun?
yes, that's correct. It was like bright orange. The only reason I carried it was because we didn't have the ability to store it in the vehicle safely. But we did need to have it with us. It wasn't any good to us locked in the armoury. We needed to have it with us, but I didn't have the capacity to put it into, lock it into the car.
When you say you needed to have it with us, there was no rioting at that time, was there, in the community?
We were there post-incident, and we'd gotten a feeling of how unsettled the community was, and Borroloola was in quite a bad way at the time.
But I think you just told us earlier that the community had been helpful to the police when you went there.
That was on a different occasion. I think that was months earlier.
So on the 27th to the 28th of December, didn't you give evidence earlier that the community had assisted you in the arrest of Mr. Noble because
Yes.
they were cross?
Yes, that's correct.
So there was no actual rioting at any time when you were there on the 27th to the 28th?
No, I think that the reason we had attended Borroloola was because the community were angry with police. I'm not sure for what reason.
Weren't you attending Borroloola for the arrest of Mr. Noble?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about other deployments.
No, just on that one,
Okay.
27, 28.
I don't think I
Carry
carried a
along.
long arm for that deployment.
Did any of your colleagues carry a long arm in relation to the...
I don't recall seeing them with anything like that at the time.
On occasions when you've been to the community because there has been unrest, have you carried a beanbag weapon?
Yes, we had to have approval to carry that, and once on those deployments where the potential threat against police was higher, then we would carry that.
Who would you seek approval from to carry the beanbag?
When we would get the informal briefing for that job, we would get told whether it was approved or not.
Do you know who was doing the approving? Was it Sergeant
I'm not-
Bowens or at that level?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was probably above Sergeant Bowens at that time.
You also had an AR-15, is that right? As for your role in the
I had one. I had an AR-15 issued to me. Yeah.
And were you trained in the use of an AR-15?
Yes.
Did you ever carry the AR-15 on any jobs?
I don't recall carrying it on any jobs. I do recall we would take it with us, but then we would just basically take it to the armoury, have it there as a worst case scenario type thing.
Did you receive any training as to the circumstances in which those weapons are carried, the AR-15s?
I don't think I was trained in like what job specifically would justify us carrying it.
So, for example, in terms of the arrest of Mr. Noble, you've given evidence you don't think you did take your AR-15. Was that your personal choice that you wouldn't use it, or was it not appropriate in an arrest scenario?
It can definitely be appropriate in an arrest scenario, but on that specific day, it's hard to remember exactly what we did because it was quite some time ago. I believe we would have taken it with us because it was sort of the general, the standard practice was to take the tools that, the worst case scenario tools. But I believe it would have been locked in the armoury immediately because once I got there, I realised I got a better briefing on who the offender was. And I didn't feel like he was of such a risk to my personal safety that I felt the need to carry it.
And that was for you to make that assessment rather than for you to be instructed about it by the team leader, is that right?
I don't know if I think I would have been instructed not to carry it. But I don't think I felt the need to carry it on that day either.
When you say I think I would have been instructed, do you actually recall getting out on a job and a team leader instructing that, or are you just...
No, I don't recall exactly.
Can I come now to the lead up to the death of Kumanjayi? When I think your first involvement in any arrest plan for Kumanjayi was the 7th of November 2019, is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
You never met Kumanjayi at any time?
No, I don't think so.
On the 7th of November, you explain in your first interview, and I'm just going to read it to you, but if I get to some point and you want to see it, please let me know. See
Sure.
something in your interview. Page 9, part of my daily habit would be to look at the management's significant events. Zach must have got to work before I did, and he looked at it, and he told me about the incident in Yundamu with the axe that had taken place 2 or 3 days before, or whatever it is, or whatever it was. So we had a look at that body worn, and we had a look at who Kumanjayi was on our system, which is Promise.
That's correct.
When you got in and Zach identified that job for you and you watched the body-worn video footage, you were in the muster room?
Correct.
Who else was there?
I remember, obviously Zach was there with me. I think Brianna Bonney was there, on reflection. And I also remember there was a fella, and for the life of me, I can't remember his first name. His last name was King, and he was at the far end of the muster room.
If I said Sun King, does that ring a bell? Or...
Yeah, I remember his face. He's a South African fellow. It's definitely not that.
Not
gentleman.
Meacham King.
No, definitely not Meacham King either.
You explain parts of this in your second interview, and this is the one that you do on the 17th of January still. And you say this at page 2. You're asked, did you make comments about the actions of the members? And you're being asked, of course, about whether or not, when you were standing around watching the body-worn video, you made any comments about Officers Hand and Smith. Did you know Officers Hand and Smith before that time?
I didn't know them then, and I still don't. I don't know them now.
Had you ever been to Yundamu at any time before then?
I'd only been to Yundamu off duty. I hadn't been there in a working capacity.
What had you gone to Yundamu off duty for?
I like forward driving, and there was an opportunity for me to go and check out one of the cattle stations out on the Papunya Road, and then some of the Indigenous guys invited us to drive the back way from Papunya to Yuendamu, and so, just for the sake of a new experience, we did do that.
That's some of the Indigenous guys in the police force, is that right?
No, it was the guys in the community.
How did you get to know those guys in the community?
I didn't. They just, I saw them at the shop, and I'm a pretty, forthcoming guy. I just started talking to them, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing in town?" I said, "We're just getting a feel for it, really, having a look around." And I don't even know if they knew I was a police officer. Not sure, but they said, "Oh, where are you going next?" And we were going to drive all the way on the Papunya Road and then back up to Yuendamu. They said, "Oh, there's a bush track there," and so we were like. They said, "Oh, why don't you drive that?" So we did.
Is that you and Zach who did that?
No, that was some of my guys from a youth group that I volunteered at.
Were you taking kids out from the youth group?
It wasn't for the youth group, but there was, we'd gone to to Derwent Station, sort of looking for things to do in that space. Yeah.
Did you have some Indigenous kids with you then, or were you?
No, it was just like myself and a couple of the other leaders of the group.
Councillor Hanson, just coming back to the 7th of November, watching the video, I was just asked you some questions about Yuendamu. You had not done any work as a community police officer by this time, had you?
No, that's correct.
And you're about 22 years old, something like that?
Yeah, about 22, 23 years old.
He said you watched it with Zach. You're asked whether you guys talked about it, and you say yeah. You're asked what was the discussion you guys had about the video, and you say we looked at it, we analysed the footage in terms of we were being critical of the members that were there. We analysed the footage, and I don't want to be the guy that's talking shit about other members and the way they were and that stuff, but we counted the amount of seconds it went from when Kumanjayi picked up the axe to when he ran out the door. And the whole time in that footage of Lanyon Smith, you can see his hands in front of the camera. And I think it was like 8 or 9 seconds where he didn't do anything. And then the question is, what did you guys discuss what you would have done? And you said, we discussed what tactical options we would have at the time. But, neither Zach nor I have ever killed someone as it was at that time. So when you're discussing that with Constable Rolfe, can I take it that you're explaining to the interviewers pretty frankly that when you guys were watching it, you were critical at that time, you may not be now, but you were critical at that time of the officers just holding their hands in the air rather than taking more aggressive action, is that right?
Yeah, that's a fair thing to say, yeah.
The next question was, we discussed what tactical options we would have at the time. What did you say about that?
I really don't remember the specifics of the conversation. I just know myself, and I know what things I'm likely to have said, and that's why in my statement and then again under oath in trial, I said the conversation would have gone something along the lines of X, Y, and Z.
Along the lines of he could have shot him or he should have shot him?
Yeah, no, not necessarily he should have shot him, but it was more about what, how you ask the question, oh, how could that have gone differently? Was that sort of a conversation?
Sure, but I want you to be really frank with Her Honour when you're talking about this.
Sure.
You're a young bloke.
Yep.
You're standing there with your mate.
Yep.
You're watching this body worn. You're critical of the two officers. You were basically suggesting, weren't you, that they should have at least pulled their firearm?
Yeah, that is correct. I was very junior in experience, and I probably hadn't attended enough jobs realistically in that, in the remote community especially, where I had more knowledge other than just what we were trained to do. And when we were at the college, that is the training we received. That edge weapon equals gun. That is the training that we got. And so, from my naive perspective, from the outset, I guess I was back then, and probably being a bit egotistical as well, being a young guy, I thought they hadn't abided by their training because it was all I knew was my training. I didn't have that experience, I guess.
Thank you for that frank evidence. And do I take it that Zach was saying words to the same effect, or was agreeing with you?
It's really hard to know. I remember thoughts and feelings a lot better than I remember conversations.
You remember enough to say, as you go on in this interview, you say, no, neither Zach nor I had ever killed someone, so we don't know. Was it one of the other guys in the muster room, King? Some King? He was only really fresh on the PG. He was saying he was up the other end of that muster room when we were looking at the footage. Like, this has just come back to me, and he said, you never know what would happen in that situation. You don't know how you'd react.
Yeah, that's right. I think what he was suggesting to us is that, you know, he's older as well. He probably he definitely was more mature than I was back then. I think what he was picking up from what I was saying was that, you know, you don't know how you're going to react until you're tested. And I think what he was getting at is like, I really haven't been tested, and so you just don't know.
He was saying, in effect, wasn't he, pull your head in. You can't be critical of other police members in that situation.
Yes, that's correct.
And in terms of maturity, you look back on that, don't you, and think that it was not the right thing to do to be critiquing them.
I would hate to have, you know, in such a high stress, like 10 seconds, I would hate to have someone. We weren't poking fun or anything like that, but I would hate to have someone critical of me the way I was back then, probably. Yeah.
And because one of the options that you taught about is to retreat in some circumstances, is that right?
Yeah, it's part of the. I think it's part of the 10 operational safety principles to tactically withdraw.
Chris Hand was one of those members. He was significantly older in years than you, and he had a correspondence with Travis Worst. You know who Assistant Commissioner Worst
Yes.
is? Where Assistant Commissioner Worst was just checking on his welfare after the event, and Senior Constable Hand writes back, I don't think he wanted to chop us up. He just wanted to escape. No one was injured, and that's the best result in my view.
I agree. Yeah, you know, our clientele are what comes first to us, and you know, I'm so thankful that those guys, because that's why that footage was so confronting for me, because like whether I know Chris Hand or Lanyard Smith or not, they are my police brothers. And when I watched that video, I thought one of them was going to die, and so I was petrified just watching it, because I didn't want those guys to get hurt, but and they didn't. So the result is the best option, that they didn't. No one got hurt.
What you now know, don't you, is that those officers knew Kumanjayi, or at least one of them knew Kumanjayi.
I do know that now, yeah.
And they were aware that Kumanjayi had had some significant trauma in his life growing up.
Yep.
And they were aware that he had some learning difficulties, and they had some indication of his personality. So that Chris Hand had a basis for saying, I don't think he wanted to chop us up, he wanted to get away.
Sure.
And do you reflect on that and think that's some of the advantages of community policing, that police get an awareness of who their community members are?
Yeah, it's not something that it's a really hard thing to have an appreciation for when you've only worked in a regional or a main centre, because your only exposure to people of the community is them either going through something on their worst day or them behaving in the worst way. So when you're remote, you are so immersed in that community that you get the time to see the other side of it as well. You're not just there responding to the terrible situations. You actually get the bigger picture on those situations themselves and the things that play into it. And so I can see that they would have the experience to do that, whereas I just didn't have it.
And you've given some really frank evidence about your maturity levels, and also the ego of a young man in those circumstances.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think that drops off a bit with age?
With age, definitely, but more importantly with experience. We get a lot of people that are quite old come through, and I guess policing checks a lot of people. It certainly has checked me. And also, in that period of time, I think, my son was only 2 months old or something like that. And I've learned a lot from as you do from that experience as well.
I'm going to come to some of those checks in a
Sure.
moment. When, in relation to looking at this job, you go on to explain in your interviews that you and Zach decide that you look on promise.
Yep.
You see any alerts on promise, is that right?
I don't recall exactly what we found. I've obviously searched a lot of people on promise and it all blurs.
You recall finding out that he was to be arrested for the assault of the police?
Yes.
And that there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest, is that right?
Yes, I do remember the warrant.
And is it your evidence that you just can't recall whether or not you read any alerts in relation to him?
I know there was alerts, but I can't remember what they are.
What about going on your general practice? When you're looking on promise and checking on a job, was it your practice to look at the alerts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the most important things to us because that's the difference between bush policing and, policing in a regional centre is you don't have that, quality time with members of the community. And so unless you've had a bad experience or an experience with someone, you don't get to know them. So your only option for, giving yourself some intel prior to throwing yourself into something is to look at promise and seeing what's been recorded in the data.
So there are alerts we know for Kumanjayi that include may be violent, may assault police on arrest.
Sure.
It may well be that you looked at them.
Yeah, definitely would have.
But in any event, given you'd seen the body-worn video, that would not have been a surprise to you, those alerts, correct?
No.
Did you learn or anything more about Kumanjayi? For example, the background that I told you about, the history of potentially FASD or intellectual difficulties or mental health concerns?
I don't think I knew anyone that knew him specifically. And because...
Sorry, Constable, I interrupted you.
I just don't think I had the capacity to learn those things about him at that point in time.
And it follows from that, doesn't it? There was nothing on promise that would have alerted you to those issues.
I don't think so.
Do you think it would be helpful?
I have seen an alert for FASD before, but it's usually someone... It's also hard to get people's medical records and to actually confirm things.
Sure.
And so it is challenging to understand that side of things.
Have you ever had a situation where you've looked on promise and you've seen an alert in relation to mental health or behavioural issues that has been helpful for you in determining how you approach an arrest, for example?
Yeah, there's the maybe suicidal alert is a common one that we see. Just helps to know basically where someone's head goes when they, for a lot of people, getting arrested is the worst thing that could ever happen to them, obviously. And, that little bit of insight can be really helpful.
In relation to what you did next, you and Constable Rolfe then went to Abbott's camp, is that right?
That's correct.
And Walker camp? Was it?
Correct.
You were basically just looking for Kumanjayi to see if he was there so that you would detain him if he was.
I think in Abbott's camp I had a version of events to obtain from a domestic incident that I attended previously. So while we were there, it was sort of like a shot in the dark. I just asked someone who was there, "Oh, have you seen Walker?" And they said, "Oh, no, he's not from Abbott's camp. That's Walbury."
All right.
I'm like, okay.
And that's how you describe it in your second interview. You say it was just a shot in the dark. It was
sure.
just a random
Yeah,
discussion
it was.
at Abbott's camp. But then you went to Walbury camp, did you, with Constable Rolfe?
That's correct.
And what did you do when you were there, just the two of you this time?
I don't know if we went there just the two of us.
So you then go on to explain. You say, we went to Abbott's camp. It was just a shot in the dark, just random. You did go to Walbury camp later in the day, correct?
Correct.
Was that when the other members arrived?
I believe so, yeah.
So in your memory, was there only once that you went to Walbury camp on the 7th of November? I'm not
Now
sure
that you say it. No, I know.
I don't know, so I'm
Sure.
just asking you.
Now that you say it, I don't know. I can only remember one time. But
So you explain in your first interview there was a bit of a lull in the shift, so the other members were available to help us. I beg your pardon, there is something that might help you. You say we went back to Walbury camp. So let me just prompt your memory from this first interview. You say you went to Abbott's camp and they were like, nah, no one from Walbury camp or no one from Yundamu's here. Try Walbury camp. So we're like, oh yeah, all right, fair enough. So we decided we were going to go to Walpurgis Camp just to check that out. I think his links were like House 6 or House 2 or something like that in Walpurgis. I think there was like a bit of a lull in the shift, so the other members were available to help us. So we went to Bunnings, which is near Walpurgis Camp.
Correct.
Does that assist you in any way?
Yeah, so just listening to what I've said in that statement, it sounds to me like you're talking about that one occasion where we went to Walpurgis Camp.
And you've explained in your statement you went to Bunnings before you went to Walpurgis Camp. There was a bit of a brief, what we heard referred to as a bonnet brief.
Yeah, so we attended Bunnings with the intention of, we didn't want people sort of rocking up halfway through, or we wanted to go as smoothly as possible because we'd seen those alerts, we'd seen what had happened in body-worn footage. And, a well-executed plan is a big mitigation for a lot of risk that we face. And so we just wanted to cross our T's and dot our I's on that. We wanted the house to be cordoned off immediately, so that we could basically control that space to minimise any risk to members or our clients.
And in terms of the plan, while you were there, you explain at page 12, we made the decision that Zach, Evan Kelly and I would go to the front door. And it's 3 officers at the front door, one of whom is a sergeant, is that right?
Yes.
So was Sergeant Kelly the team leader in effect?
That was my understanding.
And then you go on to say the other members would surround the house, cordon it. So if he did try and run, which is what we thought would be the most likely scenario, we would try and squirt out the back door, have some chance of catching Kumanjayi.
Correct.
Was there a discussion at the bonnet briefing about the risk, the level of risk presented?
I think everyone in my patrol group was aware of the footage and aware of his alerts.
So your understanding was that everyone there had seen the body-worn video footage?
That's my understanding, yeah.
And was the discussion of the use of force that would be required or anticipated?
No, I don't think we had any anticipated.
Was there a discussion of the entry powers?
No, I don't think so.
You're all expected as police officers to understand what your
That's
powers
right.
of entry are.
We've all worked together. We all know, we all know the law for the most part.
In relation to that job, going out to Walpurgis Camp and the bonnet briefing, did you have an ACPO with you?
I don't recall.
Was there ever any discussion of using an ACPO to try and speak with Kumanjayi?
Don't think there was. We very rarely had an ACPO on our patrol group. I don't think so.
At page 18 of your first interview, you say it didn't seem like an out of the ordinary thing to do to go and arrest an offender, but you've at some point acknowledged that he was higher risk, but it was still at that stage being viewed as an ordinary general duties job. Is that right?
That's correct. I wasn't, in that period of time, I wasn't aware of the risk matrix that we use in TRG to actually classify someone as a job as being high risk. And that's what I meant earlier when I said I use that term willy-nilly and oftentimes inappropriately.
What would happen on a TRG job now if your job as TRG was to detain an alleged offender who had been involved in the axe incident on the 6th of November, in terms of the risk assessment matrix that you're talking about?
Yeah, so that would go through our tactical intelligence space. They would look at the behaviour of that person. One of the things that that brings that score, because it's based off like every box that gets ticked, they get a certain score. And once it crosses a threshold, I don't know if it's like a score of 12 or something similar. Then they would be categorised as potentially high risk. And then what happens is over the top of that gets the risk mitigation strategy. So a method of arrest or our plan gets put in place, and then that would mitigate that risk and bring that score back down to whatever it is.
And then in terms of planning to mitigate the risk, would you, in the TRG, would you be considering things like if somebody was alleged to have been mentally ill, say psychotic,
Yeah,
I'm not suggesting
absolutely.
that was Kumanjayi, but you would
Yeah, for
consider
sure.
that if they were.
Yep.
What about if they were alleged to have poor impulse control because they had FASD?
Yeah, all of those things. Obviously, we can only work off of the information that we have. But if we have that information, absolutely, that would get included in that.
And if you know that somebody has a history of lashing out at police with a weapon, if they're cornered closely, you'd factor that into a risk assessment, I take it.
Yeah, that would probably come in under the risk mitigation side of it, potentially. I'm not actually one of the ones that does these. I don't work with that side of things, so I'm not 100% across that.
You go to the briefing where you're told what
That's right.
the results of that risk mitigation strategy are.
The teams, the operators, we come into it after that has been completed.
Do you get to have input when you're discussing that at the briefing?
No, we don't have a direct impact on the risk rating because we are not. I guess we're not trained in that.
So, and in terms of the arrest plan or operations order, you don't get to question that, do you? Or do you?
If it's definitely an adult environment,
Sure.
like we do have some input if there's a glaringly obvious thing that has just been missed, whether it's by human error or whatever. There's no issues, even with the newest guys on the team, bringing that up and we all want to achieve the gold standard. Yeah.
And you'd expect to have a mature conversation about it.
Absolutely.
And you've got some experience and expertise. You would expect that people would respect that in the group, even if they're more senior.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like, there's members of TRG that are from all over the place. Like some of the guys have never worked remote. On deployments to like Wadair, for example, they will often try and get me to go because I'm one of the few members that have served in that community, and obviously that local knowledge is priceless.
Sure. But ultimately, is it the team leader who decides how to execute the plan?
Yes.
So I'm going to come now to a challenging topic for you, which
Yes.
relates to the text messages that you're aware are in existence.
Yes.
You've had the opportunity now to see text messages that were sent to you and from you to Constable Rolfe. And you're aware that they were obtained because Constable Rolfe's phone was seized after he was charged with murder.
Yes, that's correct.
One of the ones I want to ask you about first relates to the 7th of November. Constable, and it's not on that chart, Sergeant McCormack, someone that you know from your time in Alice Springs, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Was he on your patrol group sometimes?
I don't believe so.
Did he work in the watch house when you were there?
I'm not. I can only assume that he did. Yeah.
You came to know him as another officer at the station.
That's correct. Yeah.
And is it fair to say that he's somebody who's pretty personable
Oh, absolutely.
and good fun?
Yeah, he's a typical
Irishman.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
And he was well respected by yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, I had quite a love for him. He's a great dude.
And well liked. Am I right?
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the station?
definitely not alone.
On the 7th of November, he sent Constable Rolfe a text message. You won't find it there, so I'll just read it to you. It says, in relation to the body-worn video, it's about 10 minutes after Constable Rolfe has watched the body-worn video footage.
Of the accident, sorry?
Sorry, yes, that's
Yeah,
right, the
sure.
accident. And he says, I know, fuck my whole life. You imagine if that other cop got killed and he stood there and watched it with his fucking hands up. What the fuck have we become? Now, was that consistent with the discussion that you and Zach were having when you were standing around watching it?
It may well have been consistent with my attitude towards it, for sure.
And did you receive that text message from Officer Sergeant McCormack as well?
I don't believe so.
Did Zach tell you about receiving that text message?
No, I wasn't aware of it till you've told me. No.
Okay. Was Sergeant McCormack there with you watching the body-worn video that you're aware of?
I don't believe so. He may have watched it afterwards.
Do you recall Constable Rob making a phone call to him after watching the body-worn video?
No, I don't, sorry. In
relation to, before I get to the text messages, I want going to ask you about body-worn video footage. Do you remember it coming in at some point when you were an officer?
Yeah, I think I did approximately the first 12 months without a camera.
When it first came in, there was some resistance to police wearing it, wasn't there?
Everyone weighed up the pros and cons of it. For the most part, people were really accepting of it because it was such a good way to mitigate our own complaints against police.
Because it's an objective account of what happens, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It generally paints a pretty accurate picture of what's going on. It obviously doesn't give you things like a member's facial expression.
Sure.
Like, it wouldn't show my facial expression or how I'm feeling, but it isolates what I'm seeing to some degree.
It captures words and images.
Correct.
In a way that can assist in relation to presenting an evidence in court. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you would understand it as a very important piece of evidence presented in court.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you'd appreciate, wouldn't you, that if you lost your body-worn video footage or something, you'd have to be seriously accountable for that because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you heard at any time of police making the camera or acting up for that body-worn video footage?
No, I haven't.
What about turning the camera on them so they can capture their own facial expressions?
Turn the camera on themselves?
That's right.
No, I haven't.
Have you heard about officers, for example, crying out in pain, particularly loudly or anything like that, so that you can present evidence a particular way?
No, I haven't heard of anyone trying to fudge the camera in any way.
What would you think of someone who did, or what would you think of behaviour in terms of fudging?
I think that would be totally...
How's that wrong? It cannot possibly.
Oh, it's a matter for Your Honour. I'll withdraw it. On the 3rd of September in 2019, Sergeant Kirkby engaged in correspondence with Constable Rolfe, and Sergeant Kirkby wrote, "Sorry about the stress caused by losing my shit the other night. Stress you didn't need. You sorted it well. I just had enough. He was the second person to press my button that night." Constable Rolfe replies, "Bro, there was literally no stress about it. I'm all for that shit. I've done the same thing to you more than once before. I'm always ready to make my camera face the other way and be a dramatic cunt for the film." And Sergeant Kirkby wrote, and the Oscar goes to, and Constable Rolfe wrote, "Ha ha." Have you ever been on a job with Constable Rolfe where he's turned the footage on himself and acted out?
No, not at all. No.
Do you recall, Sergeant Kirkby told us about a particular job around that time where he, to quote his words, lost his shit. And he says that there was an incident where he was running after an alleged offender and they crashed into a wall. He says that it was around that time, the 2nd of September. He described it at some point as a shed. And Constable Rolfe then came immediately after him. Were you on that job?
I don't believe so.
Do you recall any discussion of that job?
No, I don't.
Do you recall any incident where Sergeant Kirkby lost his temper during the course of an apprehension?
My experience with Kirkby's has not been... He's got a lot of experience. He's been working in the police, in New Zealand and in Australia. And I haven't seen him to be that way.
So you're surprised to hear that he lost his shit, is that right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
In relation to another job in 2019, it involved Antonio Woods on the 28th of June. Mr. Woods was at Walbury Camp. The investigation identified, after he made a complaint, that neither Constable Rolfe nor Sergeant Kirkby had activated their body-worn video cameras. You had activated your camera and then deactivated it early after 8 seconds. Do you recall that?
I do recall the job.
Why did you activate and then deactivate your camera?
I don't remember activating it. I don't remember deactivating it. But I do remember the job because I had I was involved in a complaint against police relating to that matter. I can't give an excuse or a reason as to why I didn't activate my camera. Why I did activate it and then why I didn't leave it running. I'm not sure.
You received some instruction in relation to that, is that right? Because there was a complaint?
Yeah, there was a couple of complaints where I'd been less diligent with my camera, and other members at those jobs had their camera rolling, and there was no substantiated complaints against myself. It was just that I had, I'd been unprofessional. I hadn't turned my camera on.
One of the reasons where it
received
might have been
counselling.
difficult to determine the complaint is because there was a lack of body-worn video footage.
Yeah, I agree.
In these circumstances.
Yep.
And can I suggest to you, makes it difficult for members of the public who might make a complaint.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree that it might also cause other members of the public to question the integrity of police if they don't turn their body-worn video footage on?
Yeah, especially when the community knows we've got, the capacity to record everything, I guess. Yeah, it does. It definitely comes across that way.
Since that incident on the 28th of June, were you more diligent in relation to your body-worn video footage?
Yeah, now that I'm in the territory response group, there are times when, for the protection of our tactics and stuff, that we're not to use the cameras. But I don't think I've missed a opportunity to use it. And in fact, I try and hold the other guys accountable as well, because after we've made our arrest and we've finished with certain tactics, then we are obligated to use it as well.
When you were in Alice Springs Police Station in 2019, were there any of the sergeants who gave you any instruction in relation to body-worn video footage?
I don't recall sitting down doing like a formal training session on it, but there was always in the muster briefing, the sergeants would regularly say, "Remember to turn your body worn on," and so on.
In this case, Sergeant Kirkby had not turned his body-worn video footage on. Do you recall any reluctance from him not to?
No.
Can I come back to the text messages then? I'm going to start, if you just have a look at that table. With the very first text message where Constable Rolfe texts you on the 10th of June in relation to a female member of the police force whose name I won't use at this stage. Bro, did you hear, insert female member of the Alice Springs Police, past TRG? What a fucking joke, her and two others. Was it, remember back in those days, you were a younger man,
Yeah.
Constable Rolfe was a younger man. Do you recall Constable Rolfe having an attitude that it was a bit of a joke that women got into the TRG, some women?
At that point, she hadn't gotten into TRG, but I hear what you're saying. I don't.
He's expressing some incredulation, or he's surprised that a female police officer, this particular one, has passed the TRG, and he thinks it's a fucking joke.
Yeah, I can see that from the text messages. Yeah.
Was there an attitude generally towards some members of the police, female members of the police force, that they weren't fit for TRG?
It was definitely surprising when a female passed the selection because it was so demanding. But I don't remember feeling like they didn't deserve a place there, or if they hadn't earned it.
Well, to be fair, you don't respond.
Yeah, that's correct.
You go on, and one thing I wanted to ask you about was the 22nd of June 2019. In an exchange with Constable Rolfe, you're talking about, again, these places on the units, the TRG, and the expression you use in apparent sympathy with Constable Rolfe for not getting into the TRG at that stage is gay cunts.
Yeah. Yeah, I did use that.
You're talking about the bosses at TRG or management?
Are you talking about?
Just have a look at the exchange on the 22nd of June.
Yeah.
Hey bro, any info on Nandi? We only got 17. Lewis, the other places aren't linked. 3 units already, I snooze and losed. And then your expression is gay cunts. Who are you referring to?
I really don't know. I don't think that's got anything to do with the territory response group.
All right, so in that case, I'll just take you to one other time when you use an expression like that, and it's the 31st of October, and you're actually referring to your other teammates in the IRG, and
Sorry, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
find that.
sure. It's the last, it's page 6.
Oh, thanks. That helps. Okay.
And Constable Rolfe is sending a text message out to a number of people. Might head to Monty's or somewhere gay tomorrow for a few beers if you're keen to be fags with moi. And you say, I have youth tomorrow at 5:30, but if you're out afterwards, I'll be a fag with you, mate.
Yeah.
You, referring to each other using what is, I'm going to suggest you a homophobic term. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree.
What do you want to say about that now?
It disappoints me because I didn't fully sort of understand my own, how much power my words have, I guess. It's sort of embarrassing that I would refer to the youth group where I'm a leader. I'm sort of, probably should be a little bit more, I should be better than that.
Well, tell us, Constable, are you homophobic?
No, not at all.
So you're using that language as slang without thinking about it too much, is that right?
Growing up, that language was probably a little bit more acceptable, and it's like a habit that I've gotten into, which I haven't, I guess I haven't, up until this point, really had the self-discipline or what not to address.
Just in your own words, because I don't want to put them into your mouth, why do you think it might be hurtful to use that?
Oh, when I was 12 or 13 years old and that sort of language came into my repertoire, I guess, I didn't have friends that were, I didn't have friends that were gay or anything like that. And so it was, I guess, in my brain back then it was meaningless. Whereas now, especially in, these text messages are out there for everyone to see, and it's like the other language I use later on, which we'll obviously talk about. It has an impact on the people I love and care about.
And it normalises the use of the language, doesn't it?
It desensitizes. It's not good for my brain, but it also desensitizes the people that I use that language with. So, like for example, where I've used that language with Zach, it compromises Zach's integrity as well as mine.
He uses that language with you too, to be fair. I think you're responding to him.
Yeah, but I can't,
You take responsibility.
I take responsibility for the things I've said.
And can I suggest to you also that you're using that language, or that language is being used with a group of guys, at least by Constable Rolfe, and you respond to it. You've got no idea whether any one of those other members of the police force are gay themselves, bisexual, have bisexual friends, have bisexual siblings, and might actually be offended by the use of it. Do you agree?
Yeah, you never know where someone's at or what they're doing, I guess, yeah.
And if you're comfortable using the language there, you might get comfortable using it elsewhere where someone else is.
It's exactly the same as what we talked about with the training, where you fall to your lowest, I might, it's like when I've got a huge adrenaline dump, I might use language that's unprofessional when I shouldn't, because that's that's in my repertoire, and it just doesn't have a good impact on anyone.
Well, I think you're getting to a great analogy, Constable. Are you saying that what you should actually do is set a bar for yourself so you don't slip below it?
Yeah, I've come to learn that the higher my own personal standard is, the lower the less I'll fall below that when I don't have the capacity to consciously make decisions, especially. And obviously in the police force, we go to so many critical incidents that we're often going to things and we don't have the time to, it's not so much in TRG, but in GDs especially, where we don't have the time to make conscious decisions about every single action that we take, and we sort of run on instinct a little bit. And that's where it comes out.
On the 12th of July, if you go over the page, you see an exchange. It begins down the bottom, and Constable Rolfe texts you literally 50% of the women at our work. And then there's a photo of somebody. Someone told me where that came from. I think it's a GIF or a photo of someone from
Batman.
But it's obviously unflattering.
Yes.
And it says, girls shaped like this talk the most shit. And your reply is, yeah, been a bit hectic. The cops out here have fucked this town. They've been letting the niggers drink wherever they want. Ha ha. Where were you when you sent that message?
I was on one of those member respite trips to Borroloola at the time.
And Constable Rolf writes back, bush cops are fucking shithouse. And then you say, ha ha, I just got the photo. And Constable Rolf says, girls and bush cops all disgust me, ha ha. I'm just going to take you to your message for the time being, Constable.
Sure.
I won't read it to you again, but you use what's sometimes referred to as the N-word. You know it's extremely offensive, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Do you understand that the history of that word and how loaded it is? In
Yeah,
terms
absolutely.
Of horrific treatment of people with dark skin across the world.
Yeah.
What do you think now about using the term?
Well, like I said before, you know, I grew up with Indigenous people, and I do have such close friends, and the guys that were on my squad, I've come to, like guys like Lucas O'Donoghue and Justin Murray, I come to respect them so much, and you know, it breaks my heart to think that they would have to sit here and listen to my evidence.
Would you ever use that term when you're talking to an Aboriginal person?
Never.
What about in front of an Aboriginal person?
No way.
Do you accept that the use of the term with your mates might normalise it?
It definitely desensitises, like, definitely don't have the emotional response to words like that probably I should have. Yeah, definitely does desensitise.
We can see how difficult it is for you, and I'm not going to labour on some of these. I just want to finish taking you through them. So if you go over the page to the 17th, it's still in relation to the conversation when you're out at Borroloola, and Constable Rolf says, "Fuck, have the losers taken over?" And you refer to a female police officer. Is that right? I'm not going to use her name.
That's correct.
Is here and doesn't want to, quote, ruin the community by getting them offside. And Constable Rolf says, damn, man, that's shit. And you say, well, at least I can go running. What did you mean by that? Well, firstly, that female police officer was the sergeant, was she?
No, I think she wasn't in Borroloola. I think she was like the divisional super or something similar. I can't quite remember.
She'd come into the community? It just says, have a look at that. Female officer is here and doesn't want to ruin the community.
Maybe she was, yeah. I don't recall exactly what her position was.
What instructions had she given that made you write that?
Basically that we'd had 2 deployments to Borroloola. The first one, there was a no, they didn't want us to tolerate any unruly behaviour. They wanted us to be assertive and enforce the law. And then on the second deployment, I guess that was the polar opposite of what they wanted us to do. And I didn't have, you know, this is a point in time in my career where I was still obviously quite young. I didn't have the maturity to look at the bigger picture, the tactics that get used by the wider police force when dealing with communities. I just didn't have the operational experience to see the good in policing in the other way as well. And so I basically was venting. I was a bit annoyed because I was away from my family as well, and I felt like we weren't doing the community a service because I couldn't understand those other tactics that police use.
What were the other tactics that you now realise were being employed at that time?
So I'm still learning, obviously, about how these things go down, and I don't know if this is a formal thing, but this is just what I perceive. We went in there on the first deployment, and we basically just did normal policing that you would do in town. If you detect an offence, you take the appropriate measures to hold that person accountable, and so on. And so bush policing isn't like that all the time. There's more of a human side of policing that I wasn't aware of. And so what I think they were trying to achieve at the time was go in and sort of not put up with any rubbish, but then scaling that back to then go in and be more human, more personable, to reconnect with the community and to rebuild those relationships, I guess.
So community engagement, essentially.
Absolutely.
And do you now recognise, in a way you didn't then, the skill that's involved in that?
Yeah, it was a big learning curve for me. Obviously, I grew up in the communities, but I didn't have a job to do in the communities like that. I wasn't accountable for the community at the point in time. Whereas when I moved to Wadair, that was what policing in Wadair was sort of all about. There was times when you needed to be assertive, like during the riots, when you'd have 400 or 500 people throwing spears at each other. When you could get involved and help people, you had to go in and it was scary, but you had to go and sort of do what you could. But then there was other times too when, like there was a family called the Dooling family that I'd come to know really well, and one of the young fellows from that family, Theodore Dooling, he was like 17, sort of around that age. He'd begun getting involved in these riots. And so, if you can get a understanding, when you're in a regional centre, if someone's sort of getting involved in that activity, you would detect an offence, potentially arrest them and hold them accountable through the court system. Whereas out there, it's so much different. And that human aspect of it comes in where, I did what the cops out on Groote Island did to me when I was a kid. I remember I was driving too fast and one of the cops out there pulls me up and goes, "If I catch you speeding again, I'm not going to give you a ticket. I'm going to tell your dad." And I was like, oh. So I went and did that to this young fellow that was getting involved in the riots. I went and spoke with his old man because I knew he respected his dad. And so I did the same thing to him, and it was, highly effective. And that was probably the day that I came to understand this much, much better, probably.
Can I just ask you to pause for a second, Constable? It says no criticism, but might I have a Yes, I bet.
Oh.
Doesn't matter, we've sorted that.
Sorry.
In relation to your time at Port Keats or whatever, excuse me, can I just ask you to look at one more text message?
Sure.
And I expect it's going to pain you, but have a look at page 6 and the top one.
Yeah.
You refer to the blacks are drunk full time. It's before you get out to Watto.
Correct.
And you've had a lot of time to reflect on this now.
Yeah.
I understand you want to say something about that, Constable.
I'm just truly sorry, I've got such good relationships with the people out there, such that I could go out there at any point in time, whether for work or not, and I would immediately, have that respect with them. And I've just, I'm so apologetic that the words that I've used describing those guys, especially before I knew them, it just embarrasses me. And it's something that I'm really sorry about because it's, good people that obviously don't deserve to be treated this way.
You accept that it's racist language?
Yeah, I do.
Would you ever use that language in front of Aboriginal people?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't use that language in front of them. I wouldn't use that language moving forwards. I've learned a lot.
Have you talked to Aboriginal friends that you know about the fact that you engaged in that text exchange?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Was it important to you to speak to them before you gave evidence and explain?
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people before I gave evidence. It's not, I've compromised my own integrity so much in this, and I don't want to lose the respect of the people that I care about. So.
Take it, this has been a big learning curve for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think there's an important lessons here for other police officers that you'll be able to pass on?
Yeah, I've had, just in the last couple of days since coming to Alice, I've had some pretty wholesome conversations with some guys that I worked with back then. And it's been quite encouraging because the other guys are seeing what I'm going through and they're looking at it going, man, even I've reflected you know, and it feels good. I don't even although I'm deeply offended by my own conversations, the growth that I've got from this is sort of like, it's a little bit invaluable. Something that I can, you know, it's experience that I can pass on to my young fella, and it's not, gives me experience in owning my mistakes, I guess, and that is seen by the other members that I work with, and they are doing the same thing without me prompting them at all, which is awesome.
So I'll move on, nearly finished, and there's just one more text message exchange that I wanted to ask you about. It's actually the message that you sent to Constable Rolfe. Are you explaining some detail in your statement how you first heard that there had been a shooting in Yuendamu? You had nothing to do with the job out at Yuendamu on the 9th of November, correct?
Correct.
Just so that everybody listening understands.
Sure.
You, in fact, were at home on sick leave on the 9th of November. Yeah. And you explain in your statement that you had a Facebook message from your brother-in-law, who's also a member, and he said, it was late at night, about 11 o'clock, he said, "Is Mitch at work?" I thought, that's a bit weird, because it's talking about you.
It's messaging my wife.
And then you looked at your phone, you'd received a text message from him, and he'd heard about the incident at Yuendamu. He was checking that you were safe or whether you're involved. You then, at some point, phoned Constable Rolfe.
Yeah, that's correct.
Why did you phone Zach at that time?
I just had a feeling. I just knew in my gut that Dad sent the team out, because we were sort of expecting that they were going to deploy the IRT. I didn't even receive a text message. Like, I had no invitation for that deployment whatsoever, obviously because I was on sick leave. And so when, you know, I got that message from my brother-in-law, well, when my wife got the message from my brother-in-law, I just called the first person that came to mind, which was Zach.
And Zach had been interested in that job. I don't mean that in any critical sense, but he had a look at the body-worn video. He was the one that showed you the body-worn video on the 7th of November. Did you understand that he'd looked at the body-worn video a number of times between the 7th and the 9th?
Sure, yeah.
And so it was something that he felt strongly about, the fact that there had been this axe incident?
I can't remember what shifts I'd worked with him in the lead up to that, but I think we both, like, I went back and viewed that body-worn footage time after time. I tried to get as much sort of intelligence from it as I could.
And did you do that with Zach prior to the 9th of November, a couple of times at least?
I don't recall exactly who I watched it with. I may have watched it with other members as well. Yeah.
And so did you think to yourself, I bet Zach is on that job out at the IRT?
Yeah, I did. I did think that.
And did you think to yourself, did you have a gut feeling that was him who was involved?
Not necessarily that he was involved, but I had a gut feeling that he was going to be there.
So you rang him, and can you recall now what he said to you at that stage? He was at the hospital.
I think by that stage I already knew that there was a shooting. It was really hard to remember because I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something similar, when I hadn't been sleeping because I'd been ill. And I don't sleep that well majority of the time. I'm a really light sleeper.
I might just cut to the chase, because you said it out in your statement, but I'll just explain it so the family and community understand. You gave Zach a call. You wanted to see if, you say in your first statement, because I wanted to see if he was all right, and must have been when he was just getting to hospital or something, because he couldn't really talk. And then you called James Kirstenfeld.
Yeah.
Did you know that he was on the job, or was that just a hunch?
No, that was just another hunch. I obviously I knew which members were on the IRT, and I was going to just start calling every single one of them till I got someone that could reassure, because I was just so stressed. I was just so anxious for my team, essentially.
Did Officer Kirstenfeld tell you what had happened?
No, so one of the text messages I'd received prior to calling Zach said, "I heard there was a shooting," or something similar. I I don't have that phone anymore, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that alerted me to the fact. And so I called Zach. Zach was like stressed, panicked, obviously couldn't talk to me. So then I called Jimmy, because Jimmy's like the next, one of the guys that I know pretty well in the job. So I called him just to try and get an understanding of what's happened. And I think I said to him on the phone, I heard there was a shooting, blah, blah, blah. And he basically just reassured me. He said, mate, it's all good. He said, he actually said the words, I can't talk to you about it, but everything's all good.
You tried to sleep, you couldn't sleep. You then called Zach, and then Zach called you back, and you spoke to him, I think, for about half an hour in the morning.
Sure.
During that half hour, he must have told you what had happened in the house, is that right?
It's not correct. I stayed awake for that whole period of time. And you know what it's like when you're laying in bed and you want to go back to sleep, but it's just never going to happen. But for some reason, you don't get up and occupy your brain still. You just still lay there. So I did that for a long time. I called Zach again and said, which I think back now is quite selfish, because now I know what he was going through, just, vicariously. And so when we talked for that half an hour, I think there was a bit of me being on the phone to him, but him not being able to talk. I didn't want to talk to him about the incident because, again, I was pretty junior. I wasn't aware, such a critical incident. There's so much, the guys I know that have been overseas in combat and stuff like that. It's not something that they want to talk to me about, and which is totally understandable. And I didn't want to be the guy that was pressing Zach for information about something that he'd just experienced that was traumatic to him. So I talked to him about his welfare, about what the process was from memory, but I don't recall the exact conversations.
On the 10th of November, I would draw that, on the Monday night, which is the 11th, there was a barbecue, I withdraw that, there was a gathering at Constable Rolf's house. Paddy McCormack on that day sent a text around, at least to Rolf, saying, is everyone free for an IRT debrief tomorrow at around 16:30? At the IRT office, ? I'll bring the beers and let Adam and Jimmy know. Did you get that text message?
I don't believe so. I think that's probably the first I've heard of it.
Okay.
I have no recollection of it.
I'm sorry.
I don't have any recollection of it.
You then, in your statement, you say, I remember we went to his house. So if I tell you, it appears that some sort of informal debrief with beers was originally planned for at the IRT office. It appears that there was a change in venue because Constable Rolf suggested everybody come to his house. Your evidence is, the first you heard about it was come to Zach's house.
Yeah, the first I knew about it, we were going to Zach's house.
And Zach invite you to that?
I don't recall exactly how I became aware of it, sorry.
You're his close mate. You still are his close mate. It's natural that you'd want to go and comfort him, can I suggest to you?
Exactly.
Did you have an understanding that other IRT members would be at Zach's house on that day?
I guess I assumed as much.
Did you assume that James Kirstenfeld would be there, for example?
James and Zach aren't close friends like Zach and I or James and I. And so I don't know if I was expecting to see James there.
Were you expecting to see the other members of the IRT who'd gone out on that job and were then going to debrief about it over beers? I would draw that. That's a number of questions wrapped up in there. I'll break it down. Did you expect to see the other members of the IRT who'd been out on the job there?
I didn't expect not to see them.
Okay. You didn't know who you expect, but you weren't thinking...
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about things like that.
When you got there, we've heard a number of the names who were there. Adam Ebo was there, James Kirstenfeld, Luke Crotty, Tony Hawkins, Evan Kelly. You remember seeing those guys there?
Yes, I do.
Did you see Paddy McCormack there?
I think there was quite a few people there. And I remember sitting in his lounge room, and there was enough people there that you sort of couldn't find somewhere to sit. there was like people standing around the lounge room.
Do you remember Bree Boney being there?
I don't remember seeing her there.
We've heard some evidence from Officer Kirstenfeld about this. He sent a text message to Constable Rolfe while he was there at about 6:10 p.m. saying, "Don't trust these snake fucks. Lawyer told you not to comment." When Constable Kirstenfeld was giving evidence, he found it difficult to remember who he was referring to, but he agreed that it must have involved one of the other officers speaking to Constable Rolfe, and he was telling him, "Don't trust these snake fucks." In effect, the lawyer had told him not to comment.
Sure.
Do you remember what that discussion was?
I don't think I was privy to it.
You weren't privy to the text messages from Officer Kirstenfeld to Rolfe, is that right?
No, I wasn't.
You didn't know that he was sending text
No, I had
messages
no
at
idea.
that time. Does Constable Rolfe wear an Apple Watch
He does, yeah.
on his left hand?
It's hard for me to say, yeah,
Okay.
sure.
But he wears an Apple Watch that you can access your messages on, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you recall him seeing Constable Rolfe speak with Paddy McCormack at any time that you were there?
I don't specifically remember seeing Shane there.
Do you remember specifically seeing Evan Kelly, yeah?
I think Evan Kelly was there for a very short period of time at the beginning.
Do you remember anybody talking about the incident?
No. I remember James saying out loud, "Don't talk about it." And so I was sort of like, James is a lot older than me. And I was sort of like...
What prompted James to say, "Don't talk about it"?
I really don't know. I'm not sure. I remember he was sitting on my left. And I just remember him saying, "Just don't talk about it. Just don't talk about it."
Bree Boney gave evidence when she was being interviewed that she recalls a discussion about you in the room. You're saying you don't recall her discussing it at all, or anybody discussing it with her?
No, like I said, there was quite a number of people there. Sort of like enough that my memories, they've all blurred into one person essentially. So she may well have heard people or taken part in a conversation about it, but I may not have been privy to it.
At the time of this gathering, were you aware of a general order in relation to deaths in custody?
I know that there is one. I don't think at the time that I'd read it.
And so I take it, does it follow from that you weren't specifically trained in what that meant, during the course of your time in the academy, that you can recall?
I don't remember the training. I would like to think that we definitely would have been trained, but
one of
I
the
don't recall it.
requirements under the general order is that anybody involved in a death in custody is separated until they give a version of events. You would appreciate the importance of that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I do. I remember. So since this whole incident, I've been involved in another one, and from that, I guess I didn't make the connection of death in custody police shooting. I don't know why. I just probably didn't have the experience, I guess. And so from this other one, I've learned a lot about that side of things. It actually quite surprised me how foolish I'd been in my dealings with some of my mates, after this, because I wasn't fully aware of my responsibilities just as a constable in relation to deaths in custody.
Going back a step, just as a general principle, if you go to a scene and there's a party and something's happened at the party and there are 5 witnesses, you separate the witnesses, don't you, so that they don't contaminate each other's
Yes.
Extremely important, isn't it, to do that when you've got a death in custody?
Yeah. Yep.
And
100%.
that's important so that public maintain confidence in police?
Yeah, I guess it definitely is important. I just didn't make the connection, like the criminal investigation. I didn't think there was a criminal investigation at the time. And so I didn't connect that with, obviously a death in custody is an investigation.
Sure.
And I can't believe it now, but I was just too foolish to recognise it.
Too junior, is that right?
Too junior. That's not something that occurs often. Like rarely we have a death in custody.
But I take it that nobody instructed you specifically in relation to that you can recall.
No,
in
not during
relation
that
to
period
what
of time.
on the 10th of November in 2019, so this is just the day after, the morning after the shooting, you sent a text message to Constable Rolfe, and it reads, Assistant Commissioner Michael White's press conference, fucking woeful. Idiot is just replying to every question with, that'll be a member for the coroner, fucking clown. He should say, the body-worn video will show the true story and exonerate the police from any other option. As hard as it is to read the fuckhead's comments, and that's in relation to Assistant Commissioner White, don't post anything. We know the members will be fine, but comments don't matter. Are they your words, or are they the words of somebody else that you're forwarding on to Constable Rolfe?
I genuinely don't remember exactly what part of this text message is mine. However, I accepted it. I sent it, and so they may as well be mine.
That's very honourable of you.
If that makes
Constable.
sense.
But I do want to try and work out, and I appreciate you want to take responsibility for it. Yeah. But look at that text message now before I ask you. Are you able to draw a line under some comments that are definitely not yours?
Yeah, there is definitely a part. Like some of it I know for sure is language that I don't use. Don't know exactly what. Obviously, I don't want to get. I'm not intending to be deceitful in any way. I definitely want to be honest. I just don't know at what point. From the point, if you look at the thing where it says the member has to answer his critics with, that is not language I use from that point onwards. As far as the comments about the press conference, I don't remember typing or writing those words, but it's probably a fair reflection of how I felt at the time.
What do you think now about using that language to, or take the language out, about expressing that criticism of an assistant commissioner who's giving a police conference, that the press conference that just alerts the public to?
Yep, so since then I've come to learn that Assistant Commissioner Michael White he'd been really ill. I think someone told me that he hadn't slept for I don't know, I think it was 40 something hours. I wasn't aware of any of that. I was emotionally charged. I was sympathising with Zach. It also sort of goes to show how little my capacity for seeing things from someone else's point of view was at the time. And since then I've got to know, I haven't really gotten to know Assistant Commissioner Michael White, but I have, in recent times we've had some challenges within the Territory Response Group, with things that have gone on with their previous members. And, he's one of the first guys to come down and go, you guys going all right? And I get a good sense of what his actual leadership's like from that, and I don't think this is really a fair representation of his.
And he's a bloke, I don't know him personally, but it's fair to say he's been in the Northern Territory Police for a significant period of time.
Yeah, I remember he stood out in front of the Alice Springs station, and I think there was a media release about his length of service or something similar.
And he's a mature gentleman.
He is, yeah.
And he's thoughtful.
Yeah, he appears to be.
And he appears, given your dealings with him since, to genuinely care about members.
I think he definitely cares about members more than I allowed by forwarding this message.
And in relation to your words there about an assistant commissioner, he's also somebody who is a considerable number of ranks above you at the time and was deserving of respect. Do you accept that? Since this time, I've read a book called Extreme Ownership by a guy called Jocko Willink, and it's all about leadership and how to be a leader, even as a subordinate. And it goes back exactly to what I talked about earlier with, as a leader of my peers, I've compromised Zach's integrity here by sending that message to him. I haven't shown leadership amongst people of my rank, let alone the people below me.
the guys that have just started, you know, I'm a likable guy, and they look up. People do look up to me, and you know, I said it in private, but that means nothing when it's, you know, it doesn't matter that it was in private. It's still a genuine mistake.
Do we see a bit of ego in that, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's got young bloke written all over it, unfortunately.
You go on to write some comments, and just so everybody understands, they're on the record. I'll read them onto the record, but I will also read the exchange that follows so we can see where you were getting that from. You write, the member has to answer his critics with IAMO plus P, I intent. The shit cunt was telling them he was going to stab the police. A, ability. He had the ability to do so because he both said it and was a young, fit male who, looking at Rolf, would have had size disparity. M equals means. He had an edged weapon and told the police he, more than said, was going to kill them. O, opportunity. The members let him get close enough to be afforded the opportunity to stab one of them, and coupled with all of the above, IAMO plus P equals preclusion, in quotes. I was precluded from all other options available to me, being distance, time, cover, taser, baton, spray, etc. So I had no other option but to protect myself and those with me by shooting the offender to gain immediate subject control and incapacitation. That what I did, in brackets, taught by some very experienced old members in 1994, never forget it, IAMO plus P. Now that clearly wasn't written by you because you were not taught by some very old experienced members in 1994, were you? I think you weren't born.
I was one, yeah.
So
Wasn't learning anything about policing then.
you then send that to Constable Rolf and say, Ian Nankerville sent me this to send to you. He was involved in shooting someone in Vigpol, so he said to send this through. And Constable Rolf writes back, awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you for that, brother. You haven't volunteered this information. We've got it in the text messages.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate I'm putting you in a difficult position, Constable, asking you about your communications with a senior officer. But who is Ian Nankerville?
Ian Nankerville was my sergeant in Port Keats, and now he's a friend.
And he's a member of the Military Police Association, is that right? I
think so.
Did you understand him to be an active on the executive of the Northern Territory Police Association at that time?
No, not at that time. I wasn't aware.
So you were working with him as he was your sergeant, is that right?
No. During this period of time, I was still working in Alice Springs, I believe.
Where was Sergeant Nankerville?
He was in Port Keats. I think basically I'd been gazetted that position in Port Keats because I'd applied for it prior to this incident. And he was aware that I was coming. And so he had reached out to me because he knew, I don't know how, but he knew that I was friends with Zach. And so he reached out to me to support me and, to make sure I was okay, even before I was under his command, I guess.
And he sent you that text message and told you to forward it on to Constable Rolf?
That's what I've said in the text, yeah.
And that's what, is it uncomfortable because I'm asking
It is uncomfortable. You know, I respect Ian Nankerville and, I naively forwarded that message on and I never expected to, I only found out last night that the text message below, Ian Nankerville sent me this to send to you. I've read this message. I thought I'd sent it up until last night. And so it's just, it's hard for me. It makes my friends look bad. I don't like it.
You were talking before about, in relation to Assistant Commissioner White, not seeing it from his perspective.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you've said about your sympathy for Constable Rolf and your concern for him. Do you reflect on this now and think you weren't thinking about Kumanjayi's family and their loss at that time?
At the time, I was really probably selfishly caught up in what was going on around me. I was a dad at the time, but I wasn't long a dad. So I didn't have a bigger view of the world as I do now, and like I think about my boy. If I don't care what that kid does, you know, if he does the wrong thing and if he's involved in an altercation where he loses his life for any reason, whether he's done the right thing or the wrong thing, the thought of that breaks my heart, and I didn't have that perspective then.
Is there? I need to give you a break, and I've only got one short topic. I think I said 5 minutes about 40 minutes ago.
I'm feeling comfortable still. I'm happy to continue.
Is there anything that you know that Kumanjayi's families, a lot of them are listening in?
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of them may listen later. Is there something that you want to say to them?
Yeah. This has highlighted a lot about myself. It's highlighted probably more about myself than the police, but it definitely has brought up some things about the police. I hope that they can see where I've come from, you know, my upbringing, the standard that I hold myself to now, and I thought I held myself to then. I let myself get to a place where this sort of thing wasn't offensive to me, and that was obviously, I don't fully understand how I got there, but I am working that out. It's clear to me that the things that I've said have offended not only, people in this courtroom, the people I work with, but sort of most importantly, Walker's family. I never intended to offend anyone with it, but it's like I said before, I think our words sort of have more power than that, even with or without intent. And it's just that, I'm wholeheartedly sorry for the things that I've said and the way I've behaved.
And it's been important for you to come and be able to say that to the family.
It is, yeah. There probably would have been ways to put it off, and I didn't really consider doing that because it takes away my opportunity to stand by what I believe in and what I believe in owning your mistakes and having the I want to be the man that I expect my son to be, and so this is the opportunity that I've had to do that, and probably I can't walk out on the street and start apologising to people left, right, and centre because it doesn't have the same impact. It definitely doesn't have the same impact as my words have had in these text messages. So, I appreciate the opportunity to say something. And I can understand that, it's affected like we talked about before with the Coniston massacre and whatnot. I realise that the police have sort of little by little taken back a bit of ground when it comes to having the respect of the community. And, I have probably undone a bit of that work, and, professionally, it's not good enough either.
Constable, I want to be really fair on you. Have a look at the terminology that's used about Kumanjayi. I won't repeat it.
Yeah, sure.
Into the intent.
Yeah.
When I read that, at first I thought that was your descriptor, but in fact you're cutting and pasting the descriptor that was sent to you by Ian Nankerville. Is that right?
That's correct.
When you sent that text message, when you forwarded it on, did you have in your mind that you might corrupt deliberately or inadvertently the evidence that Constable Walker or influence it?
I can see now, I'm in my 7th year of policing, and that, as I said before, I didn't realise how foolish and naive I was back then. So this is a good opportunity for me to reflect on that. My only intent was to look after Zach. When I read this, I felt better. And so my intent was to make Zach feel as best I can. Obviously, it's not my place. And I sort of, I don't know, I didn't have any intent to lead Zach or to school Zach or anything like that. I know that that's the position of his lawyers, not mine. I just didn't realise.
Constable, you've got some really interesting insights, I know, from speaking to you outside the courtroom about post-traumatic stress or the sorts of responses that police might experience if they go to some really serious jobs. Have you read about that?
I have. It's something that I am really interested in it because I see, like, especially in this process, I have seen my, colleagues go through all kinds of different emotional stages when relating to all this stuff, and then just in general policing. I know that hormonally, like, the average person goes to I think it's 1.5 critical incidents for their entire lifetime. Whereas a police officer will go to between 200 and 400 over a 10-year period. And in a place like Alice Springs where the workload is extremely high compared to elsewhere, in 5 years, potentially someone's gone to 300 or more critical incidents. And so for each one of those sort of instances, there's a hormonal release from the amygdala in the brain of adrenaline. That coupled with shift work and not being in line with the circadian rhythm, people don't eat well, people struggle to exercise, all of those things that really make a difference. Hormonally, police just aren't the same as, members of the public. And it is an oppressive job, and it is hard to go to the same problems day after day after day. Obviously, we're cops, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than we would hold the community to, I guess.
When you were going through your training in 2016, did you learn anything about what to anticipate and how to handle it?
All of the learning that I've done in relation to post-traumatic stress basically has been, I think, mostly my own, research and whatnot. Since joining the Territory Response Group, it's a big deal for us. Obviously, we go to less jobs, but the jobs we do go to generally, we go to the more intense jobs. And so my OIC, it's important for him to invest in us for our mental welfare. And we had almost like a seminar with some guys called Dan and Ben Pronk, who's a doctor from the Special Air Service, who, after his time in the Defence Force, he's now sort of leading the charge on resilience. And I read his book, The Resilience Shield, and it basically imparted to me all these different techniques and strategies for getting over and getting through the hardship. I would describe that book as like a cop's best friend. I wish that I could make every single cop read it. It is.
Do you think it would be a good idea to incorporate some of that learning in the
it's very extensive, but the philosophies and the the things that I learned in that book, it would be so beneficial for us. It would be most excellent.
Is that a convenient time to have the afternoon break? And I'm just going to find out from Your Honour how long we can sit for. We have some challenges that Your Honour might need to consider stopwatch orders for with respect to this witness, because we have to get through the witness for tomorrow in one day. Excuse me. Oh, great. I'm told that our wonderful court officer is available till 5.
Look, we definitely need to take a break though.
Sure.
So we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll try and come back.
Any agrees?
All stands. Coronial Court now stands resumed. Please be seated.
Is it important that we complete the evidence today? It means that there are going to be 20 minutes for each person. So we can assume that we're here.
I apologise to Mr Mullins. I just have a couple of questions following one topic.
So we should start, Mr. Mullins.
No, said it was fine. Constable, can you have a look? Do you have those text messages in
I do.
front of you still? Could you have a look at page 4, please? Can you see there an exchange with yourself and Constable Rolfe in relation to working out?
Yes, I can.
Obviously it's an important part of the job at the IRT, particularly to keep fit.
Yes, that's correct.
And was Zach somebody that you regularly worked out with at the gym?
Yeah, we did our best to stay fit for the job.
Okay. And you see the exchange there. Constable Rolfe, halfway down the page, talks about if we do 2 weekends in a row, big workouts, and then 1 weekend monster workout, have a weekend off, etc. And you write, good idea, don't want to be sore so I can't improve my fitness. And he writes exactly, so 2 big workouts, hopefully they'll make us sore for a day or 2, but we can train through it, that'll be the plan. And the monster workout can make us sore for a few days, etc. Over the page, you use a term, I'm not going to dwell on this, but you use the term, the N-word, effectively talking to Constable Rolfe.
Yes, that's correct.
How are you using that term?
I guess I was using the term colloquially, but yeah, I was referring to him.
And I've asked you about this term. I don't want to labour the point. Do you think it's appropriate to use that term colloquially?
I don't think it's appropriate to use that term in any circumstance.
Constable Rolfe then says to you, I should get some roids off my mate in Canberra. And you write back, get us full monster, ha ha. And, And then he says, get us full monster, ha ha. And you write back, I'm keen, I want to get some of the old man testosterone. By roids, you understood that to mean steroids. Have you ever used steroids in the course of your workouts?
No, I haven't.
Do you know Constable Rolfe to be someone who has used steroids?
No, I don't know Zach to be that sort of a guy.
What about testosterone?
I don't exactly know the difference, but sure.
Any performance enhancing
No.
drugs at all?
No.
Did you know that he was somebody who on occasions used illicit drugs, recreational drugs?
No, I wasn't aware.
Cannabis?
No,
Were you aware
not
of that? What about MDMA?
No idea.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Thank you, Your Honour. Constable, my name is Mullins. I appear on behalf of the Brown family. One of my clients is the mother of Kumanjayi Walker. The preservation of evidence is a critical matter to policing, isn't it?
Yes.
It's policing 101.
Correct.
And many of the things that you were dealing with during the course of 2019, for example, body-worn videos that you've spoken about, is for preservation of evidence
I agree.
and ensuring the quality of the evidence
It's extremely important.
and ensuring that the court hears the true story.
Yes, I agree.
That's right.
Correct.
Now, at what point in time did you decide that you had a change of heart about the text messages that you've sent and the way you behaved during the course of 2019? When did that happen?
I was aware, obviously I was aware of my own language. I've always been aware of the way I speak. I became aware of the text messages that I'd sent to Zach approximately 2 months ago. 2 to 3 months, I think. I guess I've had time in the tertiary response group to be around people that are better than me in almost every capacity, and that has given me the time, I guess, to reflect on that language and on the way that I've conducted.
You see, on the 17th of January of 2020, you knew that you had sent this text. I'm going to call it the Nankerville text.
Sure.
You knew you had sent the Nankerville text on 10 November 2019. And so when you gave your statement on 17 January 2020, you knew you'd sent it, but you didn't tell the investigators about it, did you?
That's correct.
And when you gave evidence in the Supreme Court trial on the 14th of February 2022, you did not tell the prosecutor that you had sent the Naperville message, did you?
No, I did not.
And you did not tell the court that you had sent the Naperville message?
That's correct.
Because was it the case that at that point in time you hadn't had the period of reflection that you've had now?
I think that's fair to say.
You must have known that the Nankivell text might have, I'm not saying it did, but might have contaminated the legal process that Constable Rolfe was going through.
Looking back on it objectively, I can see that.
Yes, you can see that now.
At the time, I don't think I had the experience to really recognise that.
Excuse me one moment. Yeah, of course, it might have been embarrassing to tell the interviewers on the 17th of January 2020 about the Nankivell text because Sergeant Nankivell was your support person at the interview.
I'm not concerned about being vulnerable or embarrassed in front of, clearly.
Well, now, you're coming clean, so to speak, now, when the texts have been revealed, is appreciated. But can you understand that Samara Fernandez-Brown, do you know her?
I do not.
Well, she stood in front of the Supreme Court after the High Court made a ruling. She stood in front of the Supreme Court in Darwin after the High Court made a ruling, and she said the only thing the family wants is for justice, is for a fair process to unfold.
Sure.
You understand that?
Yeah.
And that's what the family wanted. And do you understand that you may well have compromised that within 48 hours of the event?
I haven't considered that until you've spoken to me about it right now. And if that is the case, then I wish there was something I could do to give those guys peace about it, obviously.
Well, it's a very important message, isn't it? Not just for you, but for other police. In that first 24 to 48 hours, your behaviour might influence the outcome.
Sure.
And for the Warlpiri people, who don't even want this law, it's not even their law, but at least they could ask is that the law that's imposed upon them can be applied fairly.
I agree.
Is that an unreasonable request, do you think?
I don't think so.
You asked some questions about medication. And policing can be a very stressful occupation.
Sure.
And police officers get depressed. You know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And are you aware whether, or did Constable Rolfe ever confide with you that he was depressed?
Not from my recollection.
Did he ever tell you that he was taking medication?
No. No, I don't have any recollection of that.
Do you know Claudia Campagnaro?
I do remember her.
And you know that she was engaged to
Yes.
Constable Rolfe?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And she was a police officer as well? That's right?
Yeah.
Did you ever work with her?
She was on my patrol group for a period of time.
She's a good officer, isn't she? She was a good officer.
I don't think I did any shifts with her as a senior partner, so I probably am not fit to comment on her abilities as an officer.
From time to time, you engaged socially with her?
I don't think so.
You never engaged?
She may have been there when I was engaging socially with Zach,
Yes.
but I don't recall a specific time.
Do you ever recall saying in front of her that you wanted to join the TRG?
I don't recall saying it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Do you ever remember saying in front of her that you enjoyed arresting people?
Don't recall saying it, but again, it wouldn't surprise me.
Was there ever any time when you and Zach Rolfe had a conversation where you were being boisterous and you said you enjoyed roughing people up, or words to that effect?
Not that I recall.
Do you ever recall a conversation in front of Ms Campagnaro where you said you hated Indigenous people?
Certainly not.
I see.
I've never hated Indigenous people.
But you felt, or you sent those texts that we've read where you've referred to people in an offensive manner?
Yes, I have.
Could you have said those words in a joking way?
Yes, certainly.
Sorry, I think you need to clarify which words are you talking about there, Mr. Martin.
Could you have said the words in front of Miss Campagnaro that you hated Indigenous people in a joking way?
No. I don't think I've ever said that I hate Indigenous people in my life.
Thank you, Honour. Nothing further.
Mr. Heard?
Thank you, Your Honour. Constable, the message.
Sorry, just let the officer know who you are.
My apologies.
It's okay.
Officer, my name is Hearn. I'm the legal representative for the Walker, Lane and Robertson families.
Good afternoon.
The Nankiville message that's been discussed was sent at 11:05 a.m. On the 10th of November 2019.
Sure.
Point being the day before the barbecue that was held at Zachary Rolfe's house.
Okay.
Okay. At that time, to be clear, you'd had a number of conversations with Zachary Rolfe, but you say that you had not been given an account by him of what had taken place.
Correct.
Other than perhaps some very bare details. The message that you received from Nankiville and forwarded on to Zachary Rolfe, would you agree, provides a framework for providing a justification for a use of force?
Yes, I agree.
And that had been provided to you by somebody who was a police officer?
Correct.
And somebody who had been involved in a police shooting?
Yes, that's correct.
And somebody who told you that he had utilised that in answering, in some way responding to investigation in relation to that shooting?
That is the framework that we get taught at the college, yeah.
Sorry, this is the framework you get taught at the college?
Yeah, we get taught this framework.
IAMO and P?
Correct.
In that exact term?
I think there's more than one way to say it, but yeah.
The distinction here is that you're not only providing the framework, but you are forwarding to Zachary Rolfe suggested content that can be provided, I suppose, to inform that framework. Badly put. You're providing a narrative in the messages as well, not just the framework, but providing a narrative.
I don't fully understand what you're saying.
Okay. Well, under I, for intent, it says, and I appreciate these are words you are forwarding, not drafting.
Yeah.
Mr. Hurst, we have avoided using the language just in this text message because of the timing of this text message in relation to the passing.
Yes.
So I'm just letting you know that we've avoided it so far. If you want to deal with it in a different way, that's a matter for you.
Well,
Interests of the family. That's what we've tried to do.
I understand. Thank you, Your Honour. Each of the letters of the acronym in this message are accompanied by some suggested narrative.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? To avoid me having to read
I'm trying.
the content.
Yeah. I don't want to agree without fully understanding what I'm agreeing to.
Well, there is a suggested version of events that could be put.
Your Honour, I actually object to this line of cross-examination for this reason. This officer, as I understand his evidence, has acknowledged quite candidly that he's simply, as it were, forwarding on a message from a third party. It's a matter for Your Honour as to what the consequences of the content of that message are in the overall scheme of things as far as evidence is concerned. This officer has expressly disavowed the notion that he was intending to somehow manipulate or get Zachary Rolfe to craft a story in accordance with this message. And that's effectively what my learned friend is trying to use this cross-examination for, and that's not appropriate.
Well, I think he might be able to ask whether this officer now understands the impact of what he has forwarded.
Well, the potential impact.
The potential impact, yes.
That's your question. I'm no different with that at all. That's not the question that's being asked.
I might adopt that question, Your Honour. Constable, did you understand at the time that the words that are contained in that message had carried the risk that they might be adopted by Zachary Rolfe?
I genuinely didn't understand. I didn't realise at the time that that was the potential that this message had. Had I understood that, I wouldn't have sent it.
Can you explain how you did not appreciate that?
Well,
You say you don't appreciate that, but how could you not have appreciated that, given that there is a narrative provided in that statement, in that text message?
Your Honour, I object. If the witness says that he can't appreciate something, then it'd be difficult for him to explain why he can't explain the narrative.
I'm happy to move on.
I think what's being put is that given the normal approach to policing and the normal way of taking statements, this seems inconsistent with that normal approach to policing. Is that fair enough?
Yes.
What's the question, sorry?
Officer, would you have, if you were dealing with a civilian and a civilian was being investigated for a crime, would you have sent a message akin to this to that person?
I wouldn't have sent this message. I think at the time I didn't make the connection between a death in custody and a criminal investigation. My exposure to a death in custody was none at the time, and I lacked the experience to remain 100% professional at that point in time.
If I can move on to the barbecue on the 11th of November, by that time, do I understand that you still had not had any conversation with Zachary Rolfe in which he had given you any details about what had occurred? Thank you. When you attended that barbecue on the late afternoon of the 11th of November, there were already people there when you arrived?
Yes, I believe there was.
And in paragraph 8 of your statement, you set out the people that you recall being there. And they are, of course, Zachary Rolfe, Adam Eberl, James Kirstenfeld, Tony Hawkins, and two other people, Evan Kelly and Luke Crotty.
Sure.
Do you also recall Brianna Bonney being there?
I think I said earlier today that I do recall her being there. I think also in my statement I say that I could be wrong about the people that I've named there.
Well, the statement that you provided where you named those persons was made in January 2020.
Yes.
So do you, that was relatively shortly after the relevant events?
2 to 3 months?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know exactly.
Of those people, Zachary Rolfe, Adam E. Burl, James Kirstenfeld and Tony Hawkins had all been present and in some way involved in the shooting that took place in Yuendamu. Understand that?
I do understand that.
And of the remaining persons, Evan Kelly, Luke Crotty, sorry, I'll reframe that. There were also, the other people who were there, Evan Kelly and Luke Crotty, they had been part of the team that had gone to Walbury Camp on the 6th of November.
I believe so.
So every person that you name as having been there at the barbecue had either been to Walbury Camp looking for Kumanjayi Walker on the 6th of November, or had it been in some way involved in the shooting in Yuendamu on the 9th of November.
Yes.
I suggest to you that the purpose, clearly, of this meeting was that there would be some discussion about what had occurred in Yuendamu on the 9th of November.
Well, I check that question. Right, that's not consistent with any of the evidence that's been put before this coronial inquest. The learned friend's not entitled to pluck stuff out of the air and put positive facts which have no foundation in evidence.
I don't know if this officer would know the purpose in the sense of what other people might have intended.
Did you understand from any messages that you received that there was to be something of a debriefing to take place?
That's not the text messages I received.
Okay. Do you recall how you received your invitation to this event?
I don't recall.
And do you recall whether or not there was in fact any conversation about what had occurred?
I think I've already said that I don't remember talking about the incident at that time.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Mr. Derek from Naja. In your evidence, you've said that you've had a number of positive interactions with Aboriginal people in your background.
Yeah.
So you said you've lived on Good Island. You grew up into maturity while you were out there.
Yeah.
You're able to do things like go to 15-mile beach, which is normally reserved for Aboriginal people only. You started learning Indirecta, is that right?
Correct.
You were able to go out and meet friends at Umbercumber. You were able to go to school en route. You were able to do a music course, and you were part of the majority, which you still enjoyed. All those things are true, is that right?
Correct.
Later on, as I understand it, you got a skin name out of your hair, is that correct?
No, that's incorrect. It was the member that I worked with there.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
You also had family who stayed out at Norwood, so you
Yeah.
started to have appreciation for culture out there as well.
Yeah, my uncle was the CEO of the Dimmeroot Land Council.
And later on, when you joined the police force, you did cultural sensitivity training and things like that.
That's correct.
Now, I would put it to you that this is a good and culturally appropriate background. Is that fair?
Sure.
And however, despite that, you still sent those text messages,
That's correct.
which, to be plain, are clearly have racial overtones and are racist.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, people would make an assumption that with your good and proper culturally appropriate background, that these kinds of texts shouldn't happen. Is it fair to say that in this case, it shows that that assumption shouldn't be made?
That's a good question. I think I've probably people that grew up in my background, I've probably let them down a bit. And it's clear that I've had a negative impact on the reputation of people like myself that have come from those places. But generally, I think that those assumptions would be made on good grounds.
Maybe putting it in a slightly different way, maybe you'd agree that it's important that everyone's prejudices and biases should be always checked. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Now, how do you think that you got to a place where you had that background, but then ended up sending these kinds of texts?
I guess as a police officer, I remember coming into the job, and the first time someone used that sort of language against, to me, I was quite shocked by it. But I guess, we get racial and derogative terms used against us every shift. And after a period of time, my level of sensitivity has probably declined to the point where that sort of language doesn't offend me, right? And so when it's used against me, I don't have an emotional response. And I guess in turn, because I let my guard down, I've allowed myself to use that kind of language without holding myself accountable, because I don't have the emotional response that probably a normal person would have that isn't a police officer.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that earlier you conceded that this kind of language is something that you use with other officers. Is that correct? And maybe heard from other officers?
There's text messages to other officers of me using that language.
Yes. And is it fair to say, so more generally, other than these text messages, that that's the kind of language that you've used with other officers and other officers have used with you?
I've definitely used that language with other officers.
You also received or sent on that text from I'm not sure if I've got that name correct.
Yeah, correct.
And there's a particular phrase used in that text, which is after the word, I'm trying to be sensitive here.
Sure.
After the words I equals intent, and there's a two-word phrase. You'd accept in the circumstances where that's coming from a police officer who's non-Indigenous with that kind of language that has racial overtones as well. Would you accept that? Or at least it's dehumanising towards.
Certainly dehumanising to that individual that it's directed at.
Okay. What I'd suggest to you is perhaps that what's happened is that you've been in a culture that's led to these text messages. Would that be the case?
I think I've experienced probably a lot of trauma throughout my career so far, and I haven't had the self-discipline to stay on guard to this sort of behaviour.
Okay. Would you at least accept that in some part, some of the kinds of language used, say, as an example of the negligible text, that's also had a part to play?
Sorry.
So the dehumanising words used by Necklehol that we discussed earlier, would you say that kind of discussion also had a part to play to lead you to sending those text messages?
I think that sort of language is used in everyday conversation by people that are confronted by the things that we as police are confronted by. And as I said, that desensitivity is a very real thing, and that, I guess, has had a part to play in it.
And we're talking, when you say desensitivity, we're talking about specifically desensitivity to Aboriginal people, is that correct?
No, I'm talking about the moral code that I was grown up with, the way my dad brought me up, the way my mum, has brought me up. The efficacy that I would otherwise hold myself to, that has been diminished over time.
Well, returning, I suppose, to the text messages that you personally sent, you'd accept, I think you've already accepted that these text messages are desensitising, dehumanising.
Yeah.
And would you agree that sentiments can lead to conduct? Meaning, if you've got these kind of thoughts in your head, or these sending these kinds of texts, it might have an impact on the way you conduct yourself or the way you might.
I don't think I have, and I've got countless hours of body-worn footage. I don't think I've let this kind of conversation influence my behaviour when I come into contact with our clientele.
Okay. Well, I would like to show you some footage, which
Sure.
the court officers teamed up. Just while it's loading up, I'll give you a bit of an indication of what this is about. This is an incident involving, and I apologise if I got this name incorrect pronunciation, David Jajonka and Larry Jajonka, and it occurred on the 18th of February 2019. And it appears that yourself and Constable Rolfe were involved in this particular matter.
Sure.
So it's in document 3-161, and the video's title is ING_0157.MOV. Thank you.
Ding. That fucking pain. Jeremy, look at that. Take blood from that real easy. Get 'em, boys. Bullets. Oh, bullets. Got 'em.
Do you remember that incident?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Now, in the footage, wouldn't you and you'd agree that it's Constable Rolfe's body-worn camera, so we're
Sure.
seeing from his perspective?
Yep.
Okay. You'd accept, wouldn't you, as Constable Rolfe is approaching the two men, the man in the red shirt is already walking away from the man in the grey shirt?
Looks like he's approaching Constable Rolfe to me.
I might ask you to replay that part because I think he's walking away in general.
Sure.
If you're talking about the man in the grey shirt, I believe...
Yeah, I'm not, sorry, I didn't,
The man in the red shirt.
I'm not sure which one was which, sorry.
Yeah.
Would you like me to play it again?
Just to
Ding. Fucking pain. Jeremy, look at that. Take blood from that real easy. Get 'em, boys. Bullets. Oh, bullets.
That was the person I was referring to. Yeah, he could have been walking away, could have been walking towards Zach.
Okay. I put it to you that that man is walking away from the man in the grey shirt as Constable Rolfe approaches him. And on that basis, I would put to you that wouldn't you accept that it was not necessary for Constable Rolfe to push the man in the red shirt?
If that man was walking towards Constable Rolfe, that Constable Rolfe may have had the impression that that assault was going to continue towards him. I don't know. You have to ask him about it, I guess.
Yeah. On the basis that he was, if you assume for a second he was walking away.
Yep, assuming that he's walking away from Constable Rolfe and he's walking away from that other man, it may well not have been 100% necessary.
Okay. I put it to you that that's the situation, and I asked the question. I put it to you, therefore there was no need for Constable Rolfe to do that. Did you ever raise this use of force with the senior officer?
Your Honour, can I object? The witness has given evidence that having viewed the footage, he's unable to discern whether the person is walking away from the incident or walking towards Constable Rolfe. He's now being asked to comment on reportable uses of force, and in my submission it's not fair.
Whatever the situation, it's a use of force, so as I understand it, it needs to be reported.
I just want to make sure that the witness is clear what they're being asked to comment on. In circumstances where he said it's not clear to him from the footage what it is that's actually happening.
It's clear that it's a use of force.
Yes.
Did you report that to the senior officer?
I
Just to
don't.
clarify, it was the subject of a CNE, so it was the subject of a use of force report.
Okay.
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
You don't.
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. No. Okay, you don't recall. My final set of questions goes back to
I take it looking at that now with additional experience,
Yep.
you would reflect on the possibility that there were other ways of dealing with that situation.
I have reflected on it, and potentially there's a number of different ways it could have been dealt with.
Even just using your voice, for example, which doesn't appear to have been used.
Yeah, it all unfolded very quickly. I don't discount the fact that tactical communications could have been extremely effective there.
I suppose then my point being is that in the context of these two men being Indigenous, could it be the case that, you know, the circumstances which led you to sending those text messages, that those thoughts in your mind have in this case manifested to your conduct, which was not to use, you know, directions and things like that?
I don't think the colour of those men's skin had any impact on Zach's actions there. Is that what you're asking?
Well, probably more asking about your own actions, but that's okay.
My own actions. I think I just got out of the car and walked over to them.
Yeah, and not giving the direction, taking up the steps.
It's one of those moments when when I can understand why me not having my body worn on is such a pain. I don't know if I was getting out of the car from the other side at the time, and whether I even saw Zach push those two gentlemen over. I'm not sure.
In your first recorded interview, this is my last topic.
Sure.
You talked about the circumstance where the news was broken that Constable Rolfe had been charged, and in that recorded interview at page 7, you say, which obviously didn't sit well with any of us, and then most people didn't come to work at all, and that sort of stuff happened. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Now, those officers who were advising the arrest of Constable Rolfe, did they provide their reasons when they said he'd been charged?
I've never had to reflect on that. I don't think they gave, I think they said he's been arrested and charged with murder, but I don't think they elaborated any further than that.
Okay. You did mention that it didn't sit well for any of us, and that most people didn't come to work. Do you mean that officers didn't attend their next usual shift? Is that right?
That's correct.
As a result of this news?
Yes.
And you say, and all that sort of stuff happened. Was there any other similar kinds of acts from officers after the news was broken, sort of disobeying the usual direction to come to work, things like that?
I think people were very affected by it emotionally, and they felt very unsure about their I don't know. It's really hard to describe a group of people's perception of a thing, you know. Like, at the time I came to work, I did my job, and that was sort of what I was concerned with at the time. I wanted to make sure that I was doing the best I could. I'm not sure if there was more that happened other than people just not coming to work.
Do you remember how long that time?
Mr. Derry, you're out of time. If there's an important question you need to ask.
No, that's fine.
Actually, you have 1 minute and 43 seconds. I've lost the time last time. Okay, sorry.
I'll impose 2 minutes on myself, Your Honour. My name's Nick Martin for the current group committee of Justice Committee.
Excuse me.
I'm not going to ask you about individual texts. I just want you to
Sure.
focus your mind, and bearing in mind your efforts today of trying to be courageous, I want you to focus your mind on the culture of the time of 2019 when you were working in Alice Springs. As you well know, there's lots of racist words and expressions and dreadful things in these texts, and some of them have come from you.
Yeah.
Presumably, and you've also spoken about how you recognise now that you were desensitised to it, and that expressions which would seem terrible and upsetting to you now were not offensive to you then.
Correct.
Like, what about around the station and on the job at the time? Would you agree that you heard racist language around the station and on the job back in 2019?
I would agree that there was that sort of language was used occasionally. I don't have a specific instance in mind.
So, because it didn't seem all that offensive to you at the time, it's not, you don't expect to remember particular sentences now, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
But you agree that the language of the racism that you've read in these text messages and read in the media recently, I won't repeat them all, but words like coon and the N-word and those kinds of words, you agree that they were used around the station on the job from time to time? Firstly, agree with that?
Very rarely, yes.
Yeah. And secondly, did you ever see anyone disciplined or get taken to task over using that kind of language, either at the station or on the job?
I remember. No,
All right, thank you.
can't confidently say.
Constable, there are 3 areas that I want to cover. I just want to deal firstly with this desensitisation.
This is Mr. Edwardson.
Good. G'day.
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Constable, anyway, desensitisation. That's sort of a description that applies equally, can I suggest, to lawyers and doctors who see all sorts of things that are quite removed from the general public, which are graphic and confronting.
Yes.
And police officers, obviously, as you've already suggested, see some terribly graphic and confronting things.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
And you have really quite candidly admitted, as I understand your evidence, that in your relatively short career as a police officer, you've found some, and seen, no doubt, some horrendous things.
Unfortunately.
Confronting images.
Yes.
And one way that people desensitise, one way that people deal with that traumatic situation is to sometimes make light of an incident by using inappropriate language.
Yeah.
I'm not for a minute trying to condone the language that you and Constable Rolfe used. Plainly, they're offensive.
Yeah.
And now that they've been released to the public, and more particularly to members of the communities, they're no doubt abhorrent from their perspective.
Agreed.
But as I understand your evidence, that was never ever the intent.
That's correct.
What you're talking about is a mechanism, an inappropriate mechanism, you've now acknowledged, to deal with the sorts of horrific situations that you've had to deal with over the limited time that you've been a police officer.
I have no intent to come in here and justify the things that I've
I'm not
said,
asking you to.
but I do agree with that.
And the difficulty is, of course, that when you're a police officer or a lawyer or a judge, high responsibilities must prevail.
Correct.
In other words, no matter how confronting and no matter how little intent there was on your part, or for that matter Zachary Rolfe's part or anybody else, to offend anyone by using that language, you now acknowledge, of course, that you have to rise above it.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've attempted to do in a very candid and honest fashion today.
That's my entire purpose today.
And as I understand your evidence, because of your particular background, you actually have a genuine love and affection for people in the communities.
Absolutely.
And the last thing you would ever have intended, despite the way in which you expressed yourself in these text messages, was ever to suggest that you are truly racist,
Correct.
or that those views which are expressed in those text messages are the way you actually feel about members who are within the Indigenous community.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, next thing I want to ask you a little bit about is what much has been made, of course, of what you now understand of the potential consequences of that text message the last text message. I won't refer to the timing, but it's on the 10th of November 2019. There are a number of things I just want to ask you about. Firstly, as I understand it, the IAMO plus P is a training technique that was taught to you, Zachary Rolfe, and every other police officer.
Yeah, that I can't remember every aspect of my training.
No.
But
it's certainly, if you draw on it, think back on it,
Yeah.
that's plainly was part of your training when you first became a
I believe
police
so.
officer. Yeah. You've told this court that it was never your intention in any way to somehow try and influence Zachary Rolfe about whatever he might say when asked or called upon to give his account about the circumstances of this incident.
I never believed. Yeah, I didn't intend to.
As a police officer, you recognise, don't you, that you all have what we call a notebook, a police notebook.
Yes, that's correct.
You, on this occasion, the 10th of November 2019, you've told us had no sort of understanding or comprehension or didn't think of this as being in the context of a death in custody.
That's correct.
You certainly didn't think of it in the context of a criminal investigation.
That's correct.
In your wildest of dreams, you at that stage would never have thought that your friend Zachary Rolfe would be charged with murder.
Correct.
And so insofar as you were communicating with him on that occasion and you had passed on the messages from the person named in that sheet, you didn't intend in any way for that to have some sort of effect on whatever version he might put forward.
That's correct.
All right. Now, I want to come back to the notebook.
Sure.
Basic 101 police training is that you should try, if you can, and document as contemporaneous with the events as you can, the incident in question.
That's correct.
And now in the modern world, one way of doing that, of course, is the body-worn video.
That's correct.
And we now know how invaluable that was and how critical it was in the trial of Zachary Rolfe,
Correct.
because everybody had body-worn videos and that captured the incident from beginning to end,
Yes.
in plain sight. The second way, of course, because video can't capture everything, the video might, for example, look in one direction, but the officer might be looking in another.
That's correct.
The video can't tell you what he's thinking
No.
at the time of the incident.
Correct.
And that's why documenting, as soon as possible, the incident in question becomes very important, or may become very important, before any contamination.
Correct.
And you'd understand, of course, that what's been put to you in these proceedings is that there was the capacity for this message to corrupt, as it were, Zachary Rolfe's narrative of the events that occurred in the shooting,
Yes, I understand that.
although quite unintentional.
Yes.
Now, notebooks. In this case, I can tell you for your own, so at least when you leave here, you don't think for a minute that that's in fact what happened. But we've got and has been provided with Zachary Rolfe's notebook, which on the instructions of his solicitor were recorded the events from his point of view at 01:47 a.m, was photographed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then sent to the solicitor acting for and on behalf of Zachary Rolfe, and then in turn handed over to the court and the coroner. In other words, his narrative, recorded with his hand, was recorded before this particular message was ever sent. So I just want you to understand that, because I don't want you leaving this place thinking, given what's been put to you, that that has somehow influenced his narrative. The last thing I want to ask you about.
So that wasn't a question.
Well, the question is this. That is consistent, is it not, with the practice and training that you would have in the normal course of recording in your notebook the events in question when the facts are fresh in your mind, so that you can call upon your notebook to say, this is a contemporaneous note, I want to refresh my memory and tell the court what happened.
Well, I object on this basis. That notebook was not, as I understand it, provided for the purposes of the criminal trial. So it was not, as I understand it, available to the prosecutor in those circumstances, just so there's no...
It's in breakfast statement, Your Honour. I'll come to that later. Could I take you now finally at page 14 of your first statement, which is the 17th of January 2020. I just want to ask you a couple of brief questions about the Walker attempted arrest of Kumanjayi Walker, which I think was on the 7th, wasn't it, of November 2019? Was the
I can't exactly recall the dates,
I
but
can't remember which one.
sure. Yep.
In any event, it's either a day or 2 days before the night, which is when the shooting occurs. You say at page 14 of your statement that there was a briefing, and I think it was described by counsel assisting as a bonnet briefing.
Sure.
And then you were asked this question. Can you recall what was said at the briefing and what the plan was? So there was a plan of sorts.
Yeah.
How many officers were there?
Approximately 5.
Approximately 5. Was Zachary Rolfe who was giving the briefing?
Was Zachary Rolfe or myself.
And yourself, all right. And basically you had limited information, a hunch almost, a possibility that he might be in the house that you were about to knock on the door.
Correct.
And so you say this when you were asked the question, just what was said to you in the briefing, and you said, the officer Morrissey then put you just the cordon, and you said cordon it off and then knock on the door, and if we'd see him inside, obviously go in and arrest him. So the plan was this: you didn't know whether he was inside, there was no one there to get consent or approval to enter the premises. Is that right?
Correct.
You have no direct evidence that he was in fact inside that building.
Only he was linked to that building.
That's right. So as part of the investigation, police officers surrounded the property. That's a cordon.
Correct.
The idea was to knock on the door.
Correct.
If it transpired he was inside, as you say, you would have gone in and arrested him.
That's correct.
That is, into the house.
Yes.
If he was there. And of course at that stage there was the warrant for apprehension as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
You know, just before Dr. Freckleton, I just have 2 matters. I won't be very long. Senior Constable, my name's Sally Oslands. I'm appearing in these proceedings for the Northern Territory Police Association.
Awesome.
I just wanted to ask you about, well, first of all, you gave some evidence earlier about the importance which police relationships and the idea of mateship, and I think you called it a police brotherhood, and how that concept drove you to join police, essentially.
That is a part of that.
Yeah. And have you maintained that? Does that concept, is that still important to you as you do your work now?
Yes, absolutely.
And can I presume then that's why, even though you weren't specifically involved in the incident on the 9th of November, that you immediately reached out to your IRT colleagues? I think you initially contacted Zachary Rolfe and then James Kirstenfeld via telephone to check on their welfare.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then you did, I think, gave some evidence earlier today about a subsequent conversation about Zach's stress, and you said you talked about how he was feeling and in fact how you were feeling about it.
I perceived from the way he spoke to me that he was under a lot of stress.
Right. Were you aware whether or not any welfare support had been offered to him at that time?
I wasn't aware at that time.
Was any welfare support or any briefing or debriefing offered to you as a member of a close-knit unit at that time?
No.
Are you aware of any debriefing that occurred for the members involved as well as the broader IRT members in relation to the critical incident at Yuendamu?
I'm not aware of any. Sorry.
And I just now would like to ask you about the text message that you've been asked about a lot, of the IAMO plus P text message. Now, you gave some evidence earlier that there was a Sergeant Nankivell that sent that to you, and I think your evidence was that he reached out to you to support you to make sure that you were okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, he was the sergeant at Port Keats at the time, wasn't he?
Correct.
And you were about to go to Port Keats.
That's correct.
And he was worried about your mental health and your welfare at that time.
Yes, that's correct.
And in fact, I think as was pointed out earlier, he then acted as your support person during the interview in relation to this matter in January 2020.
Yes, he did.
Now, Sergeant Nankerville is a former Victorian police officer who'd had some experience in a critical incident, which was a shooting in Victoria, hadn't he?
Yes.
And as you've said, the IAMO plus P method is something that officers learn in terms of assessing conduct and breaking down incidents, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were aware that when Sergeant Nankerville sent you that message, he intended that you use it as a reflection tool in terms of assessing conduct so that you could, like a method of thinking through the fog, if you like.
Object. That's not the evidence. The evidence from the text message includes that Constable Hanson texts Rolf to say, Ian Nankerville sent me this to send to you. He was involved in shooting someone in Vicpol, so he said to send this through.
I was actually asking the witness about his understanding of when Sergeant Nankerville sent it to him, what the purpose was.
Sending it. Well, it seems clear from the text message that he was sending it to him for the purpose of sending it to Rolf. Are you suggesting there's been some other conversation?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
Then you can ask if there was another conversation.
Thank you, Anna. Did you have any other contact or conversations with Sergeant Nankerville in relation to the incident on the 9th of November or dealing with stress after that?
He periodically called me pretty much from that point onwards and checked in with me to make sure that I was okay.
And
I don't think we had any further conversation about this text message whatsoever.
Are you aware of whether those principles, that IAMO plus P, if you like, is used in other jurisdictions as a reflection tool?
Sorry?
I'm sorry. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware. Sorry.
And that it might be used as a method endorsed to be used in debriefing of officers after critical incidents?
I'm not totally aware. I'm not sure.
Nothing further. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. When Sergeant Nankerville did interact with you during this period, did he do so as a representative of the Police Association?
I'm not sure.
Okay. You've told Her Honour that you've experienced a lot of trauma, that you've experienced abuse on almost every shift, that in retrospect you became desensitised. Do you put any of those forward to Her Honour as a justification or an excuse for the language that you used?
No, not at all.
You've expressed to her regret, embarrassment and shame. Is that how you want to understand how you feel about it looking back?
Wholeheartedly.
You've described yourself as immature and naive in the period when you wrote these text messages, is that right?
That's correct.
Have you grown up?
A lot.
Has it been painful?
It's been extremely difficult, but it's been extremely rewarding as well. And, I just want to be I want to be the best version of myself I can be. I want to set an example for my son and for my colleagues, for my family, for anyone that I can, really.
Will you use this kind of disrespectful, racist, sexist, homophobic language in future?
No.
What would you say to other police members who contemplate using these denigrating terms?
I think I don't think I will allow those opportunities of accountability to slip past me. I think I don't know what I'll say in the moment, but I'm definitely going to make a point of correcting that sort of behaviour.
you will personally intervene and tell them why that kind of conduct is wrong?
I think pretty much anyone that knows me has probably learnt from my actions. And anyone that doesn't know me already, and that, you know, if I see this repeated, we'll be having a conversation.
Thank you very much, sir.
Officer, thank you for coming and giving your evidence. It's obviously been a difficult process. It's difficult sitting here in court knowing that your answers and what has occurred is now open for scrutiny. But I can also appreciate that a lot of the difficult work has been done in the lead up to today, from personal reflection and no doubt through a lot of conversations that you've had with your family and colleagues. Yeah. I expect that through those conversations, not only have you grown, not only have you reflected, but everybody else that you're communicating with has learned from this difficult process.
Absolutely.
The inquest is here for the family to learn and understand as much as they can about the passing in very traumatic circumstances of their family member. But it's obviously also a process of reflection and learning for the organisations who are involved and for the individuals who are involved. And we very much appreciate that you have taken the process very seriously, and I hope that you have benefited from it.
Greatly.
You've obviously set yourself a high standard moving forward.
I have.
You probably won't always be able to live up to that very high standard, and everyone fails from time to time, but it's dealing with it and moving on that's the important thing. And I think you've set a very excellent example about dealing with these difficult issues, and I appreciate that you came to court and have participated in the way that you have.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Can I add to that before you leave? I don't purport to speak on behalf of the community or all of the family, but as I understand it, there are a significant number of the community and family who are grateful to the constable for what Your Honour just said, for coming to court and facing up to that and acknowledging the mistakes made, particularly in relation to the racist text messages, and that it is meaningful that he did so. So thank you. I just pass that on.
I'm sorry, after you, Mr.
No.
You're right. I understand that the only witness to be called tomorrow is Ms. Campagnaro.
Yes.
I don't anticipate her evidence will have any relevance to NT Health and seek leave to be excused.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Did you have something, Mr. Anderson?
No, Your Honour. Can I just confirm that the list, I've just got a few bit of juggling to do. I'll be here obviously tomorrow, Monday as well. Is Superintendent Noble still for Monday?
Yes, Your Honour.
That's yes, I understand.
Right, thank you.
All right. We can adjourn to tomorrow.
All stand. Coronial Court now stands adjourned.
Would you like to computer that? Is that it? You're done?
I'm done. Wow.
No,
So who's back next?
I